Chapter 1186. That's not what you said when you gave me the license, Roland thought to himself. Why do I feel that all the people you introduced are from the new faction? The task of exterminating the fallen evils should belong to the old faction, shouldn't it? There are indeed more people from the old faction, but... Garcia pointed at a few guys who looked like passers-by. I don't have any detailed information about them and their whereabouts are unknown. Except for their contacts, the other members of the association know very little about them. Even if I want to introduce them, I don't know where to start. Roland could not help but facepalm. If Garcia had not pointed them out, he would have thought that those middle-aged men were the chauffeurs or assistants of the Star Martialists. Not to mention their strength, the gap between their appearance and clothes was too big. Not participating in the martial arts contest did not mean that he would give up his image. At the thought of being labeled as the representative of the old faction by those glowing winners in life, he suddenly had an impulse to leave the group. Is it too late to sign up for the preliminaries of the martial arts contest? Just then, a black bus drove into the parking lot. That's the bus from the Prism City, Garcia said. Let's go. Okay. Roland patted his right shoulder. This was a code word for the witches to follow him. As long as Faldy's bugs stayed close to him, it was impossible for the witches to lose their target. They boarded the bus and went straight to the last row. Sure enough, this place suits me the best. He spread his legs and lay back on the chair. Sitting here is like sitting on a throne. Not only can I look down on all living beings, but I can also see everything that's happening in the carriage. Just say it if you're a geek, Garcia said disdainfully. How can I have a good conversation with you like this? I didn't beg you to come with me. It's my first time on a mission. Of course, you have to watch me. While they were staring at each other, there was a sudden noise in the bus. Miss Fei Yuhan, I have an empty seat here. Yuhan, come and sit with me. As the girl, who was called a genius, walked into the bus, the crowd invited her to sit with them. It seems that even the Star Martialists are treated differently. Roland sighed. That's right. The two of them agreed on this point. But surprisingly, she didn't accept anyone's invitation. Instead, she walked towards the second half of the carriage. Is there anyone sitting here? Fei Yuhan pointed to the seat beside Roland and asked calmly. Garcia looked at her in surprise, and then looked at Roland, as if trying to figure out the relationship between them. On the other hand, Roland himself was also confused. He had no idea what the other party was thinking. Feeling the gazes of the other people in the carriage, he coughed uncomfortably and said, No. Thanks. Fei Yuhan nodded and sat down as though it was a given. First meeting, or should I say, second meeting. Hello. My name is Fei Yuhan. Please advise me on this mission. I'm Roland, and this is Miss Garcia. After the introductions, the atmosphere became silent. Perhaps because she knew that a martialist's hearing was particularly sharp, Garcia didn't speak again. Instead, she lowered her head and played with her phone. On the other hand, the genius girl sat ramrod straight, exuding an unapproachable aura. It was completely out of character for someone of her age. Only Roland, who was sandwiched between the two of them, felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. He originally wanted to sit at the back to avoid attention, but now, everyone on the bus had noticed his existence. This awkward feeling of being the center of attention was only alleviated when the bus started moving. Just as he was about to discuss changing seats with Garcia, Fei Yuhan suddenly turned her head and said softly, Your Majesty. Thump. Garcia's phone fell to the ground. Roland was also stunned. He stared at her for a long time before saying, Good afternoon, everyone. I'm C02, the liaison officer in charge of intelligence and support for this operation. You can just call me 02. However, before he could say anything, a man in a suit holding a microphone interrupted him. In the following period of time, I will introduce the mission's objective and plan in detail. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. As a result, Roland could only suppress his words and focus his attention on the liaison officer. According to the intelligence, the fallen evils have become more and more active recently and have begun to act collectively, which means that the erosion is approaching. The association has received reliable information that some fallen evils are planning to hold a meeting in an abandoned factory in the southern suburbs. The specific purpose is unknown, but there is no doubt that it's not a good thing. Maybe they just want to make friends. Luo Hua's words caused a burst of laughter. If only that's the case. The man in the suit did not show any impatience. Unfortunately, the fallen evils are our biggest enemy, so it's better for them to all die. There's an underground road leading to the abandoned factory, but after the factory was closed, the road was blocked. 2 days ago, the association secretly opened this road so that we can directly kill the fallen evils. In order not to alert the fallen evils, the operation is scheduled to start at 9 o'clock sharp. The relevant equipment will also be distributed when we get off the bus. In addition, the government army will cooperate with us from the ground to prevent the fallen evils from escaping. However, only those who have awakened the force of nature can harm these monsters. Therefore, we have to divide into 2 teams, one responsible for killing the fallen evils, and the other for encircling them. The list of teams has been placed under the table. If there are no problems, we will act according to this plan. Fei Yuhan looked through the list expressionlessly, but her mind was not on the paper at all. Instead, she was thinking about the expression on Roland's face when he heard the word, Your Majesty. If an ordinary person was exposed on the spot, the first thing he would feel would be embarrassment and anger, right? Although the latter emotion was rarely shown in front of her, unless they were prepared, she was confident that she would not miss the slightest change in expression and the cover-up that followed. However, what she saw on Roland's face was a very complicated expression. There was surprise, wariness, doubt, and even a hint of joy. For a moment, she noticed that Roland opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but he quickly suppressed it. Judging from the shape of his mouth, it should be the sound of AI. Such a reaction could not be explained with common sense. It was obviously Roland's first time meeting her. Regardless of whether he agreed or denied, he should not start with the word AI. Moreover, there was no awkwardness in these emotions, which meant that he was already used to this form of address. Fei Yuhan could not help but think of the words she had heard at the banquet. At that time, she had treated them as child's play, but now she was a little uncertain. The King of the Two Worlds. If it could be said that her curiosity at the beginning was only because she wanted to see who was stronger than Roland, now she was even more interested in Roland himself. She thought that it was the right decision to participate in this joint operation. Her master had once said that the Martialist Association had a much longer history than she had imagined, and the secrets it possessed were comparable to the stars in the sky. Some of them even involved the origin of the world, which only a few people knew. Was this also the reason why they made an exception and gave the hunting license to a newcomer? Considering the other party's wariness, Fei Yuhan forcibly suppressed the urge to continue asking. Before getting a clear answer, she did not want to become enemies with Roland. As long as she made the first move, there would be opportunities in the future. It was better to take things slowly. 2.5 hours later, the bus stopped at the end of the underground road. The martialists were divided into 2 teams according to the plan. They entered the factory through the emergency exit and headed to their respective positions according to the map. Roland, Fei Yuhan, and Garcia were undoubtedly the members of the frontal assault team, while Garcia was assigned to the finishing team. After leaving behind a warning, "Be careful, don't die," she quickly disappeared into the night with the rest. "The rest of you, follow me." Just as Garcia had guessed, Sir Yulong, who was rumored to be close to a defender, was chosen as the leader of the main assault team. After giving everyone a look of encouragement, he took the lead and entered a ventilation duct. The whole operation was more rigorous than he had expected. Before getting off the bus, everyone received a pair of head-mounted 4-eye night vision goggles, a wristwatch that could display the map, a vest with a friend or foe identification device, and a headset for internal communication. This made Roland very envious. If the First Army had the same equipment, they would be able to completely reverse the disadvantageous situation of fighting at night. He silently counted and found that there were a total of 15 people in the assault team. Apart from the 3 people introduced by Garcia, the rest were all old-school martialists. From this, it could be seen that the higher-ups still recognized the ability of the actual combatants. However, if the new faction gained the upper hand in this battle, it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. Of course, Roland did not intend to get involved in the battle between the old and the new. In fact, he was also very curious about whether these stars who had stood out in the tournament could still win easily against the fallen evils, who would not rest until one of them died. Chapter 1187. This is it, Mr. Yulong said in a low voice. Through the grill of the ventilation pipe, they cautiously observed their surroundings. They were probably in a large factory, with overhead cranes hanging on both sides. It was empty below. Apart from a few abandoned old machine tools and a conveyor belt covered in rust, there was nothing left. Obviously, the owner of the factory had removed all the equipment that was worth dismantling before sealing the place. However, the factory, which was supposed to be quiet, was now burning with several torches. Under glimmer vision, the flickering flames were almost greenish-white and even somewhat dazzling. At the center of the flames, they could see about 20 distorted figures. Are they our targets? Luo Hua asked. I can't be wrong, a traditional martialist answered. I can feel their undisguised energy fluctuations. Judging from their level of corruption, they're at the end of their life. The so-called end of their life was when they completely lost their consciousness and became puppets of the corruption. At this stage, the fallen evils were basically no different from beasts. They could no longer communicate with humans and only acted on instinct. They used to be martialists. Not necessarily. Although the association has records of many martialists falling, the corruption is more likely to happen to wild awakened ones. Although this is the first time I've seen a living fallen evil, a martialist who lacks initiative and self-discipline is useless no matter what they become. Luo Hua snorted. Pitiful fellows. They don't deserve the force of nature. Captain, let's get rid of these monsters now. Let's wait a little longer, Mr. Yulong said calmly. It seems that more fallen evils are gathering here. The more enemies we deal with, the less pressure we'll face. Don't you think it's strange? Since they're already at the end of their life, why are they here instead of hunting wild awakened ones? I have a feeling that things aren't that simple. If we can figure out their intentions, it might be more meaningful than killing them. Just as everyone was exchanging opinions about the situation, Roland's gaze repeatedly fell on the genius girl. Fei Yuhan's, Your Majesty, did not fade away. It could be said that in just a few seconds, his mood had fluctuated greatly. After years of experience on the throne of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, there were very few words that could make him feel so uneasy. When he first heard the familiar title, he almost thought that Elena's soul was attached to her body, and he almost called out her name. But in the end, he swallowed his words. If Fei Yuhan was really Elena's new body in the dream world, she would not have introduced herself in the first place and would not have sat beside him without any scruples. This sudden change from joy to disappointment was not pleasant. At that time, Roland almost suffered an internal injury from holding it in. As for why Roland called out, Your Majesty, for no reason, it was not difficult to come up with a conclusion. Garcia once said that the 5 senses of a martialist were far better than that of an ordinary person, and some talented people were even better at it. Furthermore, she had attended the banquet of the Clover group and must have heard his conversation with the witches. The next question was, how much did Fei Yuhan know about his background? Judging from Fei Yuhan's probing behavior, Roland believed that she did not know much, at least nothing about the world outside the dream world. But this still alarmed him. No sentient being would want to be just an illusory existence. Once the secret of the dream world was revealed, it would inevitably bring about unpredictable consequences, and it was very likely that the consequences would be catastrophic. Garcia was right. Fei Yuhan was the one he needed to be wary of. Huh. Look, the new fallen evil seems to be a little different. Just then, A low voice came from the earpiece and interrupted Roland's thoughts. It seems to be commanding the other fallen evils. He took off the night vision goggles and looked toward the center of the factory. Under the guidance of a man in a suit, a group of fallen evils slowly walked in with 3 containers. A traitor who hasn't completely become a puppet. Mr. Yulong said doubtfully, "What are they playing at?" Several old-school martialists also frowned. Compared to the fallen evils who had completely turned into beasts, these half-human and half-human opponents were usually more difficult to deal with. They had lost the compassion of humanity, but retained their cunning and dangerous nature. Most of the awakened who could do this were already famous before they fell. Shu. Fei Yuhan, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, "Quiet. There's something in the boxes." Everyone immediately held their breath. After a while, she said in a low voice, "There are people in the boxes." "What?" I heard soft sobbing and pleading, as if they were gagged. In other words, there are probably innocent people in the boxes? Mr. Yulong asked in surprise. I've never seen anything like this in the association's records. Although fallen evils aren't afraid of killing, they wouldn't specifically target ordinary people. While everyone was looking at each other, the enemy who seemed to be the leader suddenly shouted, "It's time, children. The will of God is approaching, and God is longing for the sacrifice." Roar. The other fallen evils roared. "Come, let the power return to the source, and let the oracle return to the earth." Roar. The destruction of this world will give us a new life. Let's leave everything to God, the sacrifice begins. The fallen evils immediately let out a deafening roar. "Damn it, we have to move," the captain said through gritted teeth. The captain gnashed his teeth. Although he had never heard of the fallen evils systematically sacrificing ordinary people, let alone pleasing the gods like a cult, the fact was that they could not sit idly by and watch innocent civilians being slaughtered. In a sense, saving people was even more important than killing the fallen evils. The core spirit of the Martialist Association was to protect. Everyone, get as close to the boxes as possible and keep these monsters at bay. It's okay to let 1 or 2 escape. Trust the guys outside, they'll take care of them for us. Fei Yuhan nodded expressionlessly and was the first to rush out of her hiding place. The others followed closely behind and charged into the crowd of enemies like unsheathed blades of cold light. The factory that had been sealed for a long time suddenly boiled up. The fallen evils were caught unprepared. Their indestructible bodies broke under the bombardment of the force of nature, and once their cores were separated from their bodies, they would immediately become paralyzed. Roland, on the other hand, was at the end of the team. While covering the rear of his teammates, he carefully hid his ability. This was not the first time that he had fought with fallen evils, so he was far more experienced in fighting than the rest of the team. Unlike those martialists who had awakened the force of nature, he did not need to fight to the death with the enemies. As long as he touched the fallen evils, they would lose all their strength and then be completely at his mercy. In addition, he did not dare to touch the red cyclones, otherwise everyone would see the scene of the core spiraling into the sky. The bug on his shoulder was also trembling slightly, which meant that Phyllis and the others had already arrived. With a meat shield in front of him and support from the back, Roland was getting more and more proficient in the fight. Even though his skills seemed to be the simplest, in reality, the number of enemies he had defeated was second only to Fei Yuhan. Fortunately, the attention of the entire main battle team was focused on those boxes. Coupled with his deliberate disguise, no one noticed this unusual scene amidst the chaos. Everything went smoothly. After paying the price of a few injuries, the team successfully rushed to the boxes. More than half of the fallen evils were dead or injured. What? Looks like it was easier than I thought, Luo Hua said as he shook off the blood on his hand. He then grabbed the lock of the box and snapped it in half. Maybe the association should give me a hunting license. Hey, don't be afraid, the Martialist Association is here to save everyone. He froze on the spot before he finished speaking. The others also froze. There were dozens of people tied up in the box. They were fixed to the steel pipes like meat skewers. Their eyes and mouths were covered with strips of cloth, and they could only make stuttering sounds. Above their heads, there were the same number of core cyclones. Roland felt the hair on his back stand on end. He suddenly remembered what Garcia had said a few months ago. This thing is the source of the fallen evil's power and the proof that they have been corrupted. Once they mutate, the force of nature can no longer be restored. If we don't collect it and seal it properly, it will sooner or later infect a new host. Even the simplest touch of an ordinary person will cause them to lose consciousness. You mean, it can be used by other people? That's why people collect it. It's obvious what these lunatics are up to. Aren't they afraid that the world will be destroyed? So, this is the moment they prepared for nearly half a year. Roland turned around and stared at the leader of the fallen evils. It wore a monocle, and its hair was combed straight back. It was wearing a crisp suit and a pair of white gloves on its hands. It looked like a rigid butler. However, at this moment, his face was full of madness. Although this sacrifice can be completed without your support, it's always better to give more gifts to the oracle, right? He stretched out his right hand and snapped his fingers. The core cyclones on the top of the box all fell. No! Luo Hua reached out to push away the people who were tied up in the box. However, with so many people around, it was almost impossible to prevent them from touching the core. Kill them, now! A traditional martialist shouted. But, they are all ordinary people. Luo Hua murmured. In a few seconds, the erosion was completed. Although they were all new fallen evils and their strength and skills were far inferior to those of the fallen martialists, they had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. Especially when they were face to face, the instinct to gnaw was enough to kill them. Chapter 1188. The situation suddenly changed. The sudden turn of events stunned Sir Yulong and Fei Yuhan. The traditional martialists, on the other hand, immediately turned around and worked together to stop the fallen evils. Let's go. Find a way out, a middle-aged man said anxiously. We can't be surrounded. The other two containers were also in an uproar. Sounds of collisions could be heard coming from inside, and the iron sheet was bulging. It was obvious that the lock could not hold them for long. If there were dozens of fallen evils in these two containers, they would not be able to escape, let alone kill them. The most important thing now was to avoid being attacked from the front and the back. Fei Yuhan reacted quickly. She turned around and dashed toward the factory gate. As long as they could rush into an open area, they could split up and retreat. This was undoubtedly the best way to break out of the encirclement. Roland still chose to stay at the back, but compared to his relaxed attitude at the beginning, he was now fully focused on dealing with the new fallen evils that were pouncing on him like zombies. Even if the fallen evils could not fight as well as they should, they would still be injured if they were bitten. This is Team 1. We're in danger. The number of fallen evils far exceeds our expectations. Please help, the captain shouted while fighting back. In just a few seconds, 2 more fallen evils had pounced on them. The white light protecting them flashed twice before they were torn apart by the fallen evils. Seeing the blood and flesh of his companions, Mr. Yulong slowed down. Even a layman like Roland noticed that his fists and feet were not as agile as before, and there was a gap in his switching between attack and defense. After knocking down several fallen evils, a scratch appeared on his body for the first time. Boom! The container gate finally could not bear the pressure and was smashed open by the frenzied fallen evils. However, there were not as many fallen evils as he had expected. Roland raised his eyebrows slightly. There were a dozen dead fallen evils tied to the steel pipes. Although they had completed their transformation, they did not break free from the ropes binding them. The large holes in their bodies were still dripping with blood, as if they had been pierced by something the moment they were infected. Looking at the corpses that were lined up in a row, he could clearly see the extra holes on the walls. Well done, he couldn't help but praise in his heart. There was no doubt that it was Phyllis who did it. He could even imagine that Phyllis, under the cover of Dawnon, had quietly moved to the back of the box and inserted the blade claw into the box as soon as she realized something was wrong. What's going on? The enemy leader said angrily, "You damn thieves, what have you done to my child?" The group of people naturally had no time to pay attention to it. Although they were just as confused as it was, this was not the time to care about it. Without the pressure of fighting 10 enemies at once, the possibility of carving out a path of survival was much higher. For a time, the morale of the team was reinvigorated. Forget it. It stomped its feet. My plan will not be hindered by such a small interlude. You will all die here. After saying that, it took out a box that looked like a remote control from its pocket and pressed the button on it. Following a few loud sounds, the four corners of the factory instantly exploded, and the entire ground cracked into several pieces, collapsing downwards. The burning torches were also scattered by the airflow, and the surrounding vision suddenly became pitch black. Damn it! Roland could not help cursing. This thing actually buried explosives under the floor. Although he had a strange power, he could not fly like lightning. Your Majesty! At this critical moment, a slender hand reached out and grabbed him. After swaying for a while, he felt himself being held tightly. After a series of bumps, he finally landed on a piece of flat ground. Ahem. Ling? He asked in a low voice as he fanned the choking dust in front of him. It's me. Are you okay? The latter immediately responded. Fortunately, the explosion just now made the fire disappear, so I had a chance to catch you. As expected, after the torches were blown away, the dark-covered factory became Ling's domain. When she moved in the shadows, she could almost achieve the same effect as Nightingale's mist walk. I'm fine. Are the other witches okay? Don't worry. With Phyllis here, this level of collapse won't hurt Donnan. Faldy stayed outside the factory to monitor the situation. She didn't come in. That's good. Roland pulled down the night vision goggles on top of his head again and looked around. Your Majesty, this thing that looks like a multi-eyed demon is? Ling asked curiously. It's a low-light night vision goggles that allow ordinary people to see clearly at night, Roland explained. So even if you're in a pitch-black place, you have to be careful not to be seen by others. It's... Gurgle. Ling dived into the shadows, leaving only half of her head exposed. A few bubbles came out of her nose as if it were real water. With the help of the faint moonlight, Roland quickly identified the current situation. The collapse had scattered everyone. The scene was filled with scattered concrete slabs, so he could not locate his teammates for a while. However, considering that martialists could use the force of nature to resist conventional injuries, this level of collapse would not kill them. The enemy should also know this. Since they had set up such a trap, they definitely did not just want to trap them here. As long as they could buy some time, the backup of the second team would arrive, and then the sacrifice plan of the leader of the fallen evils would be ruined. The most suspicious point was the pit. When C02 explained the route, he did not mention that there was a basement under the assembly site. Based on the map, the factory should have been built on flat ground. Judging from the different depths of the mud walls, this was obviously not part of the design plan. In other words, the enemy had deliberately dug out the underground of the factory and installed explosives that could collapse the floor. Why? Roland noticed that the sides of the pit were flat, but the center of the pit suddenly sank, like a huge whirlpool. Most of the fallen evil's corpses slid into the center of the whirlpool and piled up. Is this also part of the sacrifice ceremony? Roland's doubt did not last long. The leader of the fallen evils appeared in his sight again. Under the command of the butler, the surviving fallen evils did not search for the hiding place of the martialists. Instead, they jumped into the center of the pit one by one with the core cyclones and the corpses of their comrades that had not fallen into the pit. Not only that, they also did not let go of the broken corpses of the martialists. In the blink of an eye, the pit, which was not very big, seemed to be filled up. Roland's heart skipped a beat. The warm current in his body suddenly became active as if it was summoned by something. God, please accept my last offering. The butler spread his hands and fell into the pit. All the cores burst into a dazzling light almost at the same time. Roland pulled off the night vision goggles and stared at the center of the pit dumbfoundedly. He saw the scarlet core cyclone slowly rising, gradually condensing into a ball, and then spreading out in all directions, forming an irregular erosion. Then, something came out of the erosion and quickly merged into a whole body. It looked like a human with a head and hands, but it was just an outline. Inside the outline, there was nothing but darkness. Countless stars swirled in it, like the deep universe. As the humanoid shadow appeared, scarlet blood flowed from its body and quickly spread to the whole pit, turning the dark underground into a distorted space of red and black. The bug on Faldy's shoulder also began to make noises, indicating that Faldy had sensed danger. This was not the first time that Roland had seen such a scene. When he was robbing fallen evils, he had encountered a similar pure magic creature. However, this one was much larger than the last one. Just its erect upper body alone was as tall as a 2- or 3-story building. It turned out that this was the enemy's real purpose. The so-called sacrifice was not just a gimmick, but an attempt to artificially create erosion so that monsters that did not belong to the dream world would come. But he did not understand. If a large number of infected core cyclones could achieve erosion, why did they wait until now and lure the Martialist Association to intervene? However, the enemy soon gave him an answer. A dozen black tentacles suddenly sprang out of the scarlet blood-soaked ground, grabbed a Martialist hiding under a concrete slab, and brought him to the magic creature. Monster. The Martialist gathered all his strength and tried to break the tentacles, but all his struggles were in vain. You stole things that don't belong to you and tried to keep them. Now it's time to return them to their owners. The magic creature grabbed the Martialist and threw him into the erosion. I will correct this mistake and return order to the right track. Accept your fate and return to the origin. Chapter 1189. The Martialists were trapped in a hopeless situation. The infected ground seemed to have become the enemy's domain. No matter where they hid, they would be easily discovered. If they wanted to escape, they would have to face the nearly 10-meter-tall wall and the strange black tentacles. Once they were caught, it would be difficult to escape with their own strength. And if they were to fight to the death, anyone could feel the powerful pressure emitted by the enemy. Not everyone would dare to step forward and face the challenge of death when faced with an opponent with such a huge disparity in strength. The only one who chose this path was Fei Yuhan. You guys go first. Fei Yuhan's clear voice came from the earpiece. A white figure rushed out from the darkness and rushed toward the magic creature while facing the surrounding tentacles. The light emitted from her body was clearly visible. That was the manifestation of the force of nature. Before this, she could only wrap it around her arms. The writhing tentacles pounced at her like venomous snakes, but Fei Yuhan dodged left and right with her feet. She managed to brush past the tentacles a few times, and only when she could no longer evade would she open her fist into a palm and slice off the tentacles. White light gathered in front of her fingers to form a sharp cone, like a hidden blade that could be extended and retracted at will. Upon seeing this, the other Martialists escaped from their hiding places and ran toward the wall closest to them. Mr. Yulong was the first to charge. What a joke! Do you think you can escape from my domain like this? The magic creature raised its long arm and swatted at the captain who was running at the front. The seemingly unreachable arms suddenly expanded several times, becoming long and thick in the blink of an eye. At the last moment, Mr. Yulong realized that the situation was not in his favor and turned around to block the attack. At the same time, a dazzling light erupted from his hand. But after 2 flashes, he was smashed into the ground along with the giant arm. After a loud bang, even the bottom of the pit was pressed into a deep gully by this blow, and the concrete fragments lying across the path were turned into a layer of fine powder. When the opponent raised its arm again, there was only a flat pile of flesh left in the ravine. The magic creature swept up the mangled body along with the mud and stuffed it into the crack under its body. In an instant, the erosion seemed to have expanded. Roland realized that it was using the core cyclone of the Martialists to widen the path of erosion. He did not know why, but there was an inexplicable displeasure in his heart. It was as if someone had taken over his things. Those cyclones should have belonged to this world, belonged to him. He couldn't tolerate this fellow's impudence anymore. Your Majesty, what should we do next? Phyllis and Donnan appeared behind him. The pit is about to be filled with tentacles. Of course it's to get rid of them before reinforcements arrive, but this process must not be seen by anyone. Roland patted Ling's head. Go knock out those that are not held back by the tentacles. Be quick, and give me a signal when you're done. That's easy. I'm going now. Gurgle. Ling replied and disappeared into the shadows. After that, it's a frontal breakthrough. He looked at the enemy's body that was nearly 10 meters tall. Although he had experience fighting similar opponents, and he knew that as long as he pulled out the astrolabe in the center of the mana body, he would be able to destroy the enemy, it was a new problem to approach that position. After thinking for a moment, Roland pulled Phyllis over and whispered in her ear. Your Majesty, how can we? Phyllis said in surprise. If I say it's possible, then it's possible. The most important thing now is to solve the problem, he interrupted her firmly. This is an order. Yes. Phyllis hesitated for a moment, but still agreed. I understand. Then there's only one troublesome fellow left. Roland frowned and looked at Fei Yuhan. While speaking, she had been sent flying twice by the enemy. Blood seeped out of the corners of her mouth and body, but she still stubbornly climbed up from the ground and attacked the behemoth that was several times her size. Although she was injured and her movements were not as agile as before, her imposing manner did not weaken. She did not look like a trapped beast in a desperate situation, but a stubborn rock exposed in a torrent. However, the number of tentacles intercepting her increased, and it was already extremely dangerous for her to deal with the attacks from all directions. Coupled with the enemy's ever-changing hands, it was almost impossible for her to get close to the enemy. If not for the magical creature focusing most of its attention on killing the escaping martialists, she might not have lasted until now. As she was in the center of the scarlet blood, Ling could not sneak in quietly, so she could only hope that Fei Yuhan collapsed on her own. Your Majesty, I knocked everyone unconscious. Ling's voice suddenly sounded in the earpiece. Well done, not a chance. Roland only realized halfway through his sentence that the earpiece was a channel that could be used by the entire squad. On the other side, Fei Yuhan was obviously stunned and staggered. It was this opening that caused her to be sent flying for the third time. The white light covering her body completely dissipated, and it was obvious that she had lost consciousness. Now! Roland braced himself and shouted. Even though there was a small flaw in the plan, he finally found an opportunity. Sorry for my rudeness. Phyllis opened the magic claws on her back, grabbed his ankle, and spun him on the spot. Roland suddenly felt the world spinning, and the contents of his stomach almost surged up to his throat. When the rotation reached its peak, Phyllis suddenly released her claws. Under the inertia, Roland was like an arrow released from a bow, flying straight towards the magical creature. The moment Roland left the cover of the lightless curtain, the enemy also noticed the unknown object coming at him. It dropped the martial artists who were knocked unconscious and reached out to slap Roland, as if it was trying to kill a fly. However, the collision did not happen as expected. Roland easily pierced through the pitch-black arm and crashed into its chest. Its tall and burly body was no longer indestructible, and it seemed to have returned to its original form, a group of imaginary illusions. The magical creature roared in horror. After a moment, it seemed to suddenly understand. It's you didn't listen to my advice after all. Roland grasped the rotating astrolabe on its chest with both hands and pulled it hard. The crimson galaxy gradually turned blue and white, and the power in his body was also cheering as if it was expecting something. Was that your brother last time? I'm sorry, it's a bit slurred, and I didn't hear its advice at all. We are one, the magical creature's voice also began to distort. Stop your foolishness. This is the last warning. Otherwise, everything will be irreversible. Everything will return to nothingness, and the accumulation of thousands of years will be destroyed. Such a crime is not something you can bear. The moment the astrolabe was pulled out, the creature's voice stopped abruptly. A dazzling white light soared into the sky and almost illuminated the entire pit. An indescribable sense of satisfaction filled Roland's body, as if his plea had been answered. The heartbeat of the earth seemed to have become much clearer. For a moment, he felt that he had become one with the world. In the chaotic realm of mind, the King of Nightmares suddenly opened its eyes. Just a moment ago, it felt a trace of an unprecedented rhythm, as if a song was accidentally played in the chaotic waves, which formed a sharp contrast with the chaos around it. Previously, when it was tracking the connection of the legacy shard, it had experienced a similar experience, but it had failed several times. After all, the lower consciousness was extremely complex, and a little carelessness would cause it to lose its way. But this time, it was much more vivid and clear. This proved that the location that triggered the rhythm was nearby. The corners of Valkyrie's lips curled up slightly. Chapter 1190. After everything was over, Team 2 finally arrived. Roland smeared mud on his face, tore a few holes in his clothes, and pretended to be as weak as the others as he lay on the ground, waiting for the Martialist Association's rescue. Although Ling's exuberant curiosity caused her to commit a grave mistake, she only imitated the button to speak step and did not change the channel to the entire team's communication mode. Therefore, Fei Yuhan was the only one who heard the declaration of knocking the monster unconscious. Not to mention the fact that she was still unconscious, even if she woke up, Roland could firmly deny it and attribute the absurd ravings to a hallucination caused by his severe injuries. As for why the monster disappeared without a trace, it was naturally a question that he could not answer since he had already fainted. Although this was equivalent to giving the genius girl all the credit for forcing the enemy to retreat, in Roland's eyes, this was exactly what he wanted. What happened next was just as he expected. Without witnessing the battle with his own eyes, his vague description did not attract the attention of the liaison officer. The association's attention was completely focused on the new erosion. Even the death of only 6 of the 12 people in the main battle team, including 2 star martialists, was nothing compared to the shocking news of a man-made erosion. The only thing that surprised Roland was that Garcia was the first one to jump into the pit when the second team arrived at the scene. Seeing Garcia anxiously shouting his name while searching for him at the bottom of the pit, as well as her undisguised joy after finding him, Roland could not help but feel a surge of warmth in his heart. Of course, this feeling did not last long. Garcia quickly put on a cold expression and muttered in a low voice, "What? You're not dead yet?" She then dragged him into the ambulance. At this point, the joint annihilation mission had finally come to an end. After returning to the apartment, Phyllis and the others expressed their concern about the warning from the magic creature. After all, the enemy's last words were somewhat shocking and did not seem to be nonsense. The fact that they could discover Roland's abnormality in the first place was a proof in itself. If it was a year ago, Roland would have indeed considered the warning of the magic creature. There was a period of time when he was vigilant and resistant to this dream world, which was gradually becoming more and more complicated and unfamiliar. It was as if something that was originally born from his will was gradually breaking away from his control. But now, he had already made a decision. The dream world was not only a tool for him to make up for his lack of knowledge, but also a complete home for the gods' punishment witches. He might not be able to make this world exist forever, but before that day came, he hoped that he could accumulate more pleasant memories for the tequila survivors who had lost most of their senses. Another reason was that he trusted his own feelings. Now that he thought about it, the subtle changes in the dream world might have started from the release of the first core cyclone. Although Roland had not figured out the relationship between the two, he felt a sudden sense of comfort when he defeated the magic creature and took away its astrolabe. He had a vague hunch that as long as he continued like this, he would find the answer one day. In addition, the end of the mission did not mean the end of the incident. It was not hard to imagine that the news of using the infected core to create the erosion would cause a sensation in the association. When the other martialists woke up, the association would definitely slowly restore the whole process of this conspiracy from different angles, and the corresponding investigation would also last for a long time. He would also be affected to a certain extent, and he might even be suspected by the new faction and even be hostile to him. But in any case, that was a matter for the future. 3 days later, the detective group finally returned to Neverwinter. Summer had not only retraced the whole process of the final battle of the Tequila, but also recorded several important scenes with the sigil of recording. After receiving the news, Roland immediately summoned the senior officials who participated in the battle to the main hall of the third border city and watched the whole battle in person. When Ashes used herself as a sword and triggered the divine will to perish together with Osrook, Roland felt a slightly trembling hand grab him. He opened his palm and gently held it until the end of the magic film. When his vision returned to normal, he noticed that Tilly's eyes were slightly red, but even so, she did not show any intention of escaping. Instead, she stood still and watched the entire rewind. All the missing pieces of the puzzle were filled in at this moment. It's the first time I've seen an eye demon merge with an ordinary demon. After a moment of silence, she let out a long sigh. But how did they do it? One of the biggest doubts about the ambush was how the demons could immediately rush to the sniping site after discovering the special action group. Although Andrea had suggested the possibility of the eye demon, it did not match the giant and clumsy image of the demon. Finally, there was conclusive evidence. A week before the final battle, Osrook cut open the face of a mad demon guard and stuffed an eyeball sealed in a box into its wound. The eyeball seemed to wake up when it sensed the blood. Its roots pierced into the mad demon's body one by one, causing the latter to let out an indescribable scream. The process lasted for nearly a week until the mad demon's head was completely occupied by the eyeball. The eyeball that the mad demon had embedded was not a stone of throwing, but an extremely rare stone of flight. Theoretically, such a stone could not be provided to a low-level demon. This also meant that Osrook had begun to prepare the necessary conditions and manpower for the trap at least half a year ago. The moment the transformed mad demon flew out of Tequila, Sylvie's position was exposed. In order to buy time for the guards to surround the mad demon, it deliberately flew to the First Army's position and then turned back, pretending to have abandoned the defense and fled. Considering that the time difference could be controlled at will, no matter where the special action group was, they would be attacked by a large group of demons after shooting. Unless they gave up this opportunity, stopped monitoring the transformed mad demon halfway and quickly retreated to the west, they would not be able to escape from the enemy's encirclement. Rather than calling it a fusion, I think it's more like a kind of control, like a carrier. Agatha pondered. The one acting as Osrook's substitute wasn't the original mad demon, but the miniature eye demon on its head. Why do you say so? Roland asked. Chapter 1191. Technology. Roland frowned. He had seen in the memories of the demons how these aliens achieved advancement. They fused with more powerful magic stones to define their talents and abilities. If they succeeded, they would live. If they failed, they would die. In essence, there was not much difference between the abilities of the witches. They were all up to fate, and it was even crueler. But technology was different. As long as they could master its rules, they could quickly expand and develop according to their needs. This was not a good sign for human beings. Are you sure? Anna, who was the closest to Roland, was also aware of this. We still need to do further research on the remains, but... She looked at Celine. Celine nodded her main tentacles and led them to a black boulder covered with cracks. This is a part of the giant skeleton. Based on the results of the current dissection, it is likely to be a living thing. Well, it's not surprising that it's a living thing, Roland said while stroking his chin. After all, an officer had mentioned in the post-battle report that when the enemy's giant skeleton was hit by a cannonball, it let out a deafening howl. This thing is equivalent to the armor of a deformed demon. No, Your Majesty, Celine said in a strange tone. I mean, this stone is alive. What? Everyone was slightly stunned and then took a step back in unison. Wait, you mean it's alive? Is the stone also a kind of demon? I don't quite understand. Can you explain it in more detail? For a moment, the hall was filled with questions. Simply put, it has an independent system and can perform simple actions on its own. Celine rolled up a hammer and hit the broken part of the stone. With a dang sound, the stone trembled slightly. Through the gap, Roland could vaguely see something similar to a meridian wriggling inside. The trembling lasted for half a minute before it stopped. Obviously, it was not caused by the hammer. From the scene, we know that there is a huge tissue hanging under the giant skeleton's abdomen. We have always thought that it is the deformed demon's body. But the results of the dissection proved that the two are not the same thing. Agatha continued, after discovering this, Celine and I still couldn't understand it. Since the skeleton could move by itself, why did the deformed demon in its abdomen exist? It wasn't until I saw the magic slayer transforming his subordinates that I suddenly realized that they were very similar. Anna was the first to react. Carrier? That's right, Celine said approvingly. Whether it's the original carrier or the devouring worm, they both have a distinct characteristic. That is, when there is no controller, they are still alive. Your Majesty, do you remember what Caberdabi said? Did you also get a piece of inheritance and upgrade your civilization? She turned to Roland and said, Your Majesty, do you remember what Caberdabi said? There's another sentence after that. Roland nodded. When he heard the word upgrade for the first time, he almost blurted out, I'm Tatarin, so it left a deep impression on him. Those weapons were also created based on the contents of the fragments. That's what it means. Tilly said thoughtfully, now it seems that Caberdabi thought so because they had similar experiences and obtained the method of making carriers from the fragments. In other words, both the spider demon and the giant skeleton are actually the combination of two demons, one as the carrier and the other as the controller. That's very likely. After all, the two have too many similarities. For example, the carriers have extraordinary vitality, can survive for a long time in dormancy, and won't die easily even if they are severely injured. It's possible to attribute the legacy shard to the underground civilization, but don't the latter use soul instruments to control the carriers? The demon's method seems to be a little different. Maybe, they didn't obtain the complete method of making the magic core, so they couldn't transform their bodies like the underground civilization, Agatha said. Or maybe this method is more suitable for them. It's just like how the Union invented the God's Punishment Army transformation method when they didn't have enough carriers. In a sense, Scourge is a carrier. Wait, this doesn't sound right. Nightingale said with a puzzled look, although I don't quite understand your reasoning, there is one thing I can be sure of. That is, humans have never received any inheritance. The weapons used by the First Army were all His Majesty's ideas, and the transformation of the God's Punishment Army was the result of the Union's research. In the end, we still mastered the method of using the magic core and took over the relics of the underground civilization, didn't we? In fact, this is the key to the problem, Agatha said seriously. I guess the relics of the gods are not the only way to obtain the legacy. That's why I call it technology instead of ability. Roland suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. An indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. You mean, learning? Yes. The ice witch exhaled. Through teaching and learning, even without devouring the relics of the gods, or the legacy shard, as Caberdabi said, we can still obtain everything the civilization has accumulated. I think this is the essence of the legacy. There was a brief silence in the hall. After a while, Celine's words resounded in everyone's mind again. Considering that the demons have created so many new weapons of war in 400 years, maybe the function of the relics of the gods is to greatly shorten the long learning process, or even complete it in an instant. The evolution of the civilization is what they call upgrading. Roland finally understood what was bothering him at this moment. Perhaps Caberdabi was right. Human beings did obtain the legacy, but it was not by relying on the relics of a certain civilization. Instead, it was the oldest form of oral transmission. As a time traveler, Roland had invisibly connected the two worlds. If that's the case, doesn't that mean that the relic of the gods is recording everything about us at all times? Wendy looked worriedly at the secret room at the side of the hall. That was where the relic was kept. Unless we can also get a fragment, no one will know the answer. Agatha shook her head. But if the demons really have the carrier technology, we're likely to encounter more challenges that we've never seen before. She looked at Roland apologetically and said, I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I'm afraid that the Union's hundreds of years of war experience won't be able to help you. It doesn't matter. For the demons, the third battle of divine will be a brand new experience. Roland comforted her. Although the future was uncertain, he had to maintain his confidence in front of everyone. In addition, if the upgrade is only limited to the technology, it means that we can also learn what we need from the demons and even the civilizations that have lost the legacy shard, right? Chapter 1192. In the following days of meetings, the General Staff reviewed and summarized the entire process of Operation Torch based on Summer's backtracking and the results of the search of the Tequila ruins. Almost every day, reports would be sent to Roland's desk. The pile of reports was almost half the height of a person. More and more details became clear. For example, the giant God's Stone that appeared in the Battle of the Northbound Slope and the siege of the Tequila City came from the God's Stone mine in the ruins. At the bottom of the mine, the detective group found the corresponding missing parts of the ore clusters. 2 medium-sized God's Stone pillars were cut in half, and the cut surface was very smooth, as if they had been cut by a sharp weapon. Although the backtracking ability could not be used near the God's Stone, looking at the overall situation, it was very likely to be related to the giant skeleton. In fact, the latter was not only a transportation tool, but also a small obelisk that could regenerate the red mist. The corroded land around the ruins was proof. However, compared to the obelisk that covered hundreds of kilometers, its coverage was only 1 to 200 meters, and it could not be created out of thin air. It still needed the supply of the red mist to maintain. As a sentinel that could move freely, its strategic significance was self-evident. The General Staff concluded that, compared to the spider demons, this giant carrier was probably a rare species among the demons. Otherwise, it could completely replace the role of the outpost and occupy the entire fertile plains before the humans could react. In addition, most of the tunnels behind the Tequila ruins were dug by the spider demons. Although their digging ability was far inferior to the devouring worms, they were still much better than the mad demons. These tunnels all started from the God's Stone mine, and the depth of the tunnel obviously considered the threshold of observational abilities. Coupled with the ample preparation time, it was not easy to discover them. As Celine and Agatha were inclined to view the giant skeleton and the spider demons as the same type of demon, Roland also gave them a new name, Monstrous Beast, to distinguish the giant skeleton from other demons. With a specific prefix, they could quickly name the demons of the same type that had not yet been discovered. Currently, these two carriers were named the Fortress-type Monstrous Beast and the Spider-type Monstrous Beast. The latter was further divided into the Stone Needle Thrower type 1 and the Human Thrower type 2. Not only was the accurate name beneficial for battle deduction and command delivery, it was also more convenient for post-battle statistics and records. Other than the detailed analysis of the battle, Roland's other focus was the shortcomings and improvements that the General Staff listed based on the results. Among them, Edith's personal report, which was also ranked first among the many problems, was still the shortcoming of the investigation ability. Putting the sky aside, in the history of human warfare, tunnel warfare was limited by the ratio of excavation tools and cost. It had always been a unique tactic and could not be used as a conventional tactic. But this rule was no longer applicable in front of the devouring worms and spider-like monstrous beasts. As long as enough carriers were gathered, the enemy could even excavate an underground passageway for an army to pass through in a short period of time. Thus, the ground beneath their feet had become a dangerous area that they had to guard against. Without a doubt, not only would Sylvie not be able to take care of it alone, it would also not be worth it. When the eye of magic saw through obstacles, the consumption would be greatly increased. Under the condition that the total amount of magic power was fixed, monitoring a target 10 kilometers away from the surface for an entire day would only require a shallow layer 3 to 4 meters deep, the size of 1 or 2 football fields. Moreover, apart from extraordinaires, all witches' abilities had a threshold. When a certain condition was exceeded, the consumption of magic power would increase exponentially. Under such circumstances, any non-emergency action would be a waste of magic power. The First Army had to take on this task themselves. Roland vaguely remembered that in history, both sides had used underground monitoring to guard against each other's tunneling and surprise attacks. The principle was similar to a stethoscope. With the characteristic of sound transmission in solid objects being less attenuated than through air, it could capture the movements of the opponent's tunneling more clearly. But this method was limited to the tunnels being excavated near the camp. For traps like the tequila that had been set up long ago, listening alone could not solve all the problems. After much consideration, Roland finally came up with a feasible method: drilling. This was a detection method widely used in the civil engineering industry. As one of the double dogs of science and technology, he had often heard of it from his roommates in the Faculty of Civil Engineering. To put it simply, it was to smash a steel bar vertically into the ground and judge the hardness of the soil according to the depth of the hammer. The test points were generally distributed in plum blossom piles a few meters apart. As long as a probe was equipped, a large area of inspection could be completed with a few people. When the number of steel bars sinking suddenly increased, there was a high possibility that there was a hole below. Combining the two methods of listening and probing, it was basically possible to detect threats from underground without the help of the witch's abilities. As for the reconnaissance of the enemy in the air, the only way to get rid of the dependence on lightning and Maggie was to develop the air force. As for when this part could be made up, it was up to Tilly. In addition, there were many conclusions in the report such as, relying too much on the position, and, lacking the ability to provide quick support. While Roland was amazed by the rapid improvement of the general staff, he also felt somewhat helpless. He was aware of these problems, but due to the limited population of Neverwinter, it was difficult for him to make up for these shortcomings in a short time. Finally, among the many reports, one point caught his attention. It was a report from a logistician at the grassroots level of the army. According to the report, the performance of the Mark I-type machine gun was not very stable during the high-intensity battle. After the decisive battle, many soldiers in the machine gun squad complained that they spent more time changing the barrel than firing the gun, which was a great burden to the logisticians. If possible, he hoped that the engineering department could improve it. This was also the first time that Roland had directly received the feedback from the frontline soldiers after the establishment of the feedback system. As the users of the weapons themselves, they were the ones who knew the pros and cons of the weapons best. In fact, when he was attacked at Tower Station No. 1, he had noticed that there was an abnormal increase in the number of discarded gun barrels. However, since these parts could be recast, he did not pay much attention to it. Now that he thought about it, it must be because of the lack of experience of the shooters and the sudden increase in the pressure of the enemies. During the night, the soldiers were more nervous. Moreover, it was difficult to confirm the results of the battle, so they would not let go of the trigger. The air-cooled gun barrel was not as durable as the water-cooled gun barrel. It could handle the intensity of the previous battle, but now that the shooting time was prolonged, the heat dissipation could not keep up. This also alerted Roland. In the beginning, he had used the air-cooled gun barrel purely because he wanted to use it for multiple purposes. If he had designed it according to Maxim's idea, it would not be universal. However, the actual effect was not as ideal as he had expected. Although the production of tracer bullets and the increase in the experience of fighting at night could alleviate this situation, the enemy had only sent a small number of soldiers to the Western Front. If the main force of the battle really came to a point where the demons were everywhere, the misfiring of the heavy machine guns would be fatal. Fortunately, this report made him realize his mistake. Chapter 1193. In addition to the summary of the final battle, the General Staff also made a preliminary plan for the Third Battle of Divine Will. Although the enemy's intention was still unclear, one thing was certain: Tequila should not give up no matter which direction the demons attacked from. As a nail on the fertile plains, it could not only prevent the demons from expanding, but also serve as a cornerstone for Neverwinter to advance into a wider territory. As long as the tequila was in the hands of the humans, the northwest of Grey Castle would not be in danger of being suddenly attacked by the Red Mist. Therefore, it was necessary to restore the holy city, which had been abandoned for hundreds of years, into a fortress. If the main force of the demons still attacked from the fertile plains, the First Army would have to strengthen the defense of the railway line to prevent the demons from cutting off the supply line and actively attack the Red Mist outposts. The whole strategy was basically the same as Operation Torch. Although the pressure was great, they had experienced it before. As long as they could withstand it, the victory of the humans was just around the corner. To put it simply, it was similar to a set of emoticons that Roland often saw in his previous life: don't be afraid, just do it. If you win, ahem, 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 if you lose, go to the sea to fish. In short, just do your best. The problem was the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter in the northeast. If the demons really attacked the hinterland of the human kingdoms from the ridge of the continent, the battle would be extremely troublesome. The Kingdom of Wolfheart had many hills and the Kingdom of Everwinter lacked rivers. Moreover, there was also the Kingdom of Dawn and 2 mountain ranges between them. It was impossible to lay the railway all the way to the north of the continent in a short period of time. The construction of tunnels and bridges to cross the natural barriers was already difficult to solve. At the same time, the First Army could not rely on the local nobles to provide logistical support. After the implementation of the population plan, the nobles would definitely become enemies with Greycastle. At that time, it would not be surprising if the nobles would stab them in the back. Therefore, this part of the work could only be done by the army itself. In this case, the only reliable way of transportation was by sea. The problem was that the port cities were all concentrated on the east coast of the continent, which was not good for the defense line. Once the demons surrounded them, there would be no way to retreat. It would be fine if they could hold on, but if they failed, the losses would be considerable. In addition to fighting the demons, the First Army also had to protect and evacuate the people. Compared to the boundless and desolate fertile plains, there were too many uncertainties in fighting in another country. Because of this, the General Staff did not even have a plan that involved the North. It only mentioned this possibility. In the previous meeting, Roland even noticed that Edith had dark circles under her eyes. Ever since she was deceived by Osrook's strategy, the Pearl of the Northern region seemed to be even more determined to win. Roland put down all the reports and sighed. For him, it would be better for the demons to continue attacking from the fertile plains. However, before Lightning and the Tequila detection team received any concrete information, this was not a matter that could be decided by personal preference. Rather than worrying about the enemy's choices, it was more effective to use his own methods to increase his chances of winning. At this thought, he stood up. "Your Majesty?" Nightingale asked with dried fish in her mouth. "Accompany me to the new research institute," Roland said slowly. "It's time to see how far the Radiance plan has progressed." In the North Slope Laboratory in Neverwinter. Lady Anna, as soon as Lucia White opened her mouth, she was interrupted by Anna. "I told you not to call me Lord." "Yes. I couldn't help calling you that when I thought you were the Queen." She stuck out her tongue in embarrassment and put down the metal block in her hand. "I've prepared all the materials you need. If there's nothing else, although I'm the Queen, you're also my partner." Anna walked up to her with a smile. "Are you going to the new laboratory?" Lucia nodded vigorously. "Yes, it's about time." "Then go. Be careful on the way." Anna walked her to the gate of the courtyard. "If you run out of magic power or have some free time, come and accompany me." "I will." Lucia waved her hand and ran down the mountain road. Her work schedule was the most varied in the Witch Union. She often had to go back and forth between the chemical laboratory, the mine furnace area, the backyard of the North Slope, and other places. Before the new laboratory was built, she basically did not have a fixed place. Among these places, the backyard of the North Slope was the one she spent the most time in. She fused high-quality alloys according to Anna's ideas and requirements, and then watched Anna cut the metal ingots into precise parts. This process always gave her an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Perhaps it was because she felt that the world was becoming more and more beautiful because of her power. After all, she had come to Neverwinter to cure her sister's demonic plague. She did not expect that she would not only find a place for her sister but also live a life like home. To be honest, Lucia was a little uneasy at first, as if she owed everyone a lot. But now, she could also become one of the contributors and assist Princess Anna and the chief alchemist in building this increasingly prosperous city. Her uneasiness gradually turned into fulfillment and pride. Moreover, the more Lucia spent time with Anna, the more she felt respect for her. She had never thought that a witch could play such a big role and bring earth-shaking changes to the city by herself. Lucia admired Anna's knowledge, talent, and concentration when she devoted herself to work. If Nightingale was the person she trusted the most, then Princess Anna was the person she wanted to be the most. And now, she seemed to see such an opportunity. Since His Majesty built a brand new laboratory on the south bank of the Redwater River, she also had a fixed place of her own. According to His Majesty, this work was related to the fate of all human beings. If the experiment went well, everything she did might become the biggest trump card in the battle of divine will. Thinking of this, Lucia could not help but walk a little more briskly. After crossing the Redwater Bridge and continuing south along a spacious cement road for several hundred meters, a row of towering walls appeared in front of her. Different from the busy factories, this place was located between the industrial area and the farmland, and the roar of machines could hardly be heard. The trees on both sides of the road cast a cool shade on the ground. Although it was already autumn, the leaves above her head were still lush and green. Occasionally, a few bird chirps could be heard, which not only did not make it noisy, but also highlighted the tranquility and serenity of this place. Judging from the surrounding environment, this place looked more like a residential area than a laboratory or something like that. However, the heavily armed soldiers standing guard outside the gate proved that this was not an ordinary courtyard. When Lucia walked to the gate, the soldiers raised their hands to salute her and then turned around to open the gate. And this was only the first checkpoint. The security inside was even tighter. Walls divided the courtyard into several areas. Except for a few people, the rest of the people had to verify their identity and be accompanied by guards. Lucia was naturally one of the former. She smiled and greeted the soldiers. After passing through several checkpoints, she finally arrived in front of a white brick house. The house looked similar to an ordinary residential building, and there were many creepers growing on the walls. The only difference was that there was a golden plaque hanging next to the door, on which a few words were engraved. Chapter 1194. Lucia did not understand what high-energy physics was, nor did she understand what she was doing had anything to do with physics. However, she noticed that every time His Majesty saw the plaque, he would stop and stare at it for a long time, as if it had a strange power. This made Lucia more active in her new work. Although what she was doing was not much different from what she was doing in the furnace area, every time she thought of His Majesty's expression, she felt that she might be doing something really great. After entering the inner yard, Azima, who was lying on a chair with her eyes closed and resting, raised her hand to greet her. "Hey, you're here." Good afternoon," Lucia hurriedly returned the greeting. "The sun is warm here, so I fell asleep for a while." Azima stretched herself. "Shall we start working?" "Yes." "Sorry to trouble you." She waved her hand. "Don't mention it. I'm your assistant. If you need anything, just tell me. It's not the first time we've met, so there's no need to be so formal. Besides," Azima muttered in a low voice, but the warm autumn wind still carried her words into Lucia's ears. "I can get 2 golden dragons' monthly salary just by sitting here. What's there to complain about?" Lucia could not help but cover her mouth. To be honest, she was a little afraid of Azima at first. After all, she had heard from Vendi that the internal strife in Sleeping Island was caused by this tall, red-haired witch with sharp facial features. As the leader of a small group, Azima was naturally outstanding. Judging from Azima's behavior, she indeed had the demeanor of a big sister. Therefore, when His Majesty asked Azima to be her assistant, Lucia was quite perturbed and felt that she was not qualified to be the head of the new research institute. However, after a few months of contact with him, Lucia found that he was not as scary as she had imagined. Although he occasionally complained about Princess Tilly and even blamed His Majesty, he was very cooperative when it came to his work. He was also very sensitive to her salary. Lucia often heard nagging like, "Isn't it just to support myself? I will definitely prove it to you," and, "Nightingale, just wait and see." In short, he was not as indifferent as he seemed. In fact, he was a very interesting person. "Then, thank you." Lucia opened the wardrobe and handed her a white protective suit. The first step was to completely isolate his body from the outside world. Not only did he have to touch her, but he also had to go through a special filter to breathe. This was something that His Majesty had repeatedly told him. The purified substance was extremely toxic. Even a grain of powder could kill a person. In order to prevent carelessness, the two of them had to check each other's clothes, especially the parts that they couldn't see. After putting on the protective suit, Azima gave her a thumbs up. Then the two of them walked into an open-air courtyard. Cyan stone bricks were placed neatly on the ground, covering more than half of the courtyard. Apart from their darker color, they looked no different from the bricks that had just been baked in the furnace area. However, as long as she held them in her hands, she could immediately feel the difference. Each stone was extraordinarily heavy, as if they were made of metal rather than stone. Lucia picked one up and covered it with her magic power. Due to being baked in the sun for a long time, the surface of the stone brick was slightly hot, but this did not affect her ability. Under her magic power, the brick turned into a mass of colorful compositions, some of which were very dazzling as if they were glowing. The color blocks that His Majesty needed only occupied a very small part of them, like ink spots that were accidentally spilled on a painting. Of course, compared with the pile of ores in the North Slope Mountain, this was already a great improvement. Under her command, the color blocks slowly moved and reassembled until they became 4 separate entities. The largest part was waste, which could be thrown into the dustbin. Every day, Tequila would send people to collect it, so she didn't need to deal with it. As for the remaining 3 parts, each was smaller than the other. The last mass of silvery white metal, which was the poisonous substance that His Majesty had mentioned, was almost the size of a grain of salt. Lucia carefully put it into a glass jar and put it aside. The other 2 masses of metal were much larger. One was about the size of an apricot, and the other was about the size of a fingernail. They were also silvery white in appearance and could only be distinguished by her ability. These 2 were much easier to deal with. Lucia threw the large one into a basket and gave it to Anna to cut into pieces for the new machine she was testing. The smaller one was put into a lead box and the container would be changed every 5 kilograms. If there was no other task, she could separate this number of metal blocks in 2 or 3 days. However, His Majesty had said that these bricks and stones were found in the ruins of the radioactive clan's buildings and had been refined in advance. It would not be so convenient to change them into ores. After dissecting a black brick, Lucia stood up and opened her hands to Azima. This was also a rule set by His Majesty. Every time she finished dissecting, she had to make sure that there was nothing left on the scene or on the clothes. With Azima's ability to trace the origin, she could see the tiny particles that were difficult for ordinary people to see. Only after making sure that all the relevant materials had been collected could she proceed to the next raw material. About 2 hours later, Lucia felt that her magic power was reaching its limit. "That's enough. Let's call it a day." Azima probably noticed her fatigue and came over to support her. "We have to go to class in the evening. If you run out of magic power, you'll have to be carried back later." Lucia nodded. "You're right." In addition to the problem of magic power, the airtight protective suit had made her sweat all over. If she could not concentrate, it would be a waste of effort to continue. After a simple cleaning, they returned to the room, took off their clothes, and heaved a sigh of relief. It was almost dusk. The breeze blowing in through the window was a little chilly. Listening to the swaying of the ivy, Lucia felt that she had come back to life in an instant. At this moment, a familiar voice suddenly came from behind. "Thank you for your hard work." She turned to look at the door and saw His Majesty and Nightingale smiling as they walked into the inner yard. Nightingale was carrying 2 bottles of sky blue chaos drinks in her hands. "This is," Ozima was stunned. "It's my personal reward." "Don't tell anyone," Roland said, spreading his hands. Thank you." She took the drink from Nightingale somewhat stiffly. Lucia could not wait to open the bottle. When the refreshing drink flowed down her throat, she momentarily forgot about the great event. Perhaps it was indeed significant, but at this moment, she was satisfied enough. After they finished their drinks, Roland asked, "How's the decomposition going?" Chapter 1195. Roland randomly picked out a lead box, opened the lid, and held the silver-white metal block in his hand, feeling its heavy weight. Before it was stimulated, it was no different from a piece of pure iron. As long as one did not lick it, it was basically harmless. If one didn't have a deep enough understanding of it, it would be difficult to imagine just how much power was hidden in its small body just by looking at its appearance. It was with this that human beings first touched the threshold of mass energy conversion. Compared with all the chemical gunpowder before, this step could be said to be a new step. Roland roughly counted the number of lead boxes and found that there were about 50 of them. Excluding the weight of the containers, each box contained 1 kilogram of uranium-235, which was nearly 100% pure. And there was more than one lead box like this in the room. If you put all of them together, perhaps the research institute would really be high energy. "How do we use these things to turn them into the glory of the sun that you mentioned before?" Nightingale asked curiously. "Do we make them into special machines or ignite them? I always feel that they won't burn." "You want to know?" Roland could not help laughing. "It's simpler than you think. Just pile the metal blocks in the box together, and they'll automatically emit light and heat. The uranium in this box alone is enough to raise Neverwinter to the ground. That's why Lucia has such a heavy responsibility. If she shakes her hand." Suddenly, the room fell into a dead silence. Lucia covered her mouth with her hand, and her eyes were filled with horror. "No way." After a while, Ozima said incredulously, "You mean, if we're not careful, we may destroy the whole city?" Nightingale dashed forward, snatched the lead box from Roland's hand, and put it back into the box. Then she grabbed his hand and dragged him out. "Hey, wait, what are you going to do?" "Of course," Nightingale said anxiously. "Of course I'm going to take you out of the city and then let someone carry these things away. Lucia, inform Wendy and ask her to contact the administrative office." I'll also go to Her Highness Tilly." Ozima gritted her teeth. "Only she can summon the sleeping spell." "Stop, I was joking." The room was suddenly in chaos. Roland had to spend some time to calm everyone down. "Are you sure you're just joking?" Nightingale snapped. "Ahem, of course. I'm just talking about the theory," he quickly added. "But in reality, it's not that easy to activate it. Even if I do my best, I can't guarantee success." Lucia heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Your Majesty, you scared me to death. This isn't funny." Nightingale glared at him. "If Vendy and Scroll heard this, whether it's a joke or not, I'm afraid they'll ask us to move the new research institute far away from Neverwinter," Roland said helplessly. "As long as you know, or we can move you to a safe place." "Well, forget what I said before." He cleared his throat. "As long as you don't say anything, Vendy and Scroll won't know. Maybe a bird has already heard it." Nightingale looked out of the window. "Intercept the message and I'll pay you a bottle of chaos drink," Roland said without hesitation. "Deal." She blinked and disappeared in front of the 3 people. Looking at Lucia and Ozima, who were dumbfounded, Roland shrugged and said, Don't mind it. It was part of the joke." After a while, Nightingale returned to the room. No suspicious targets were found, but the reward, it's still valid. Lucia's expression finally softened. She hummed a tune and chewed on dried fish. "Well, Your Majesty, Azima said with a serious face after a moment of hesitation. What you said before wasn't all a joke, was it? When you made the rules, you repeatedly emphasized the importance of weight. In order to avoid confusion or mismeasurement, you even controlled the weight of each lead box to be exactly 4 kilograms. When weighing, it must be together with the container. This way, you can ensure that the metal pieces in the box are equal. She paused. Also, you said that if there was an accident in the research institute, or if there were signs of intruders, the first thing to do was to inform the guards to seal off the scene, and then immediately return to the castle to report, instead of entering the courtyard to check the situation. This proves that they are indeed dangerous, right? Roland looked at her in surprise. You have good observation skills. You're basically right. In addition to toxicity, weight is also a key factor. That's why they were placed separately. To be able to determine the nature of the extract from the rules and regulations, it could be said that she was cautious and meticulous. It was precisely this meticulousness that allowed her to awaken the ability to trace the source. But weight alone can only endanger the research institute. If I want to turn it into a weapon against the demons, I need something else. Those particles that are placed separately. Azima quickly realized what was going on. Not exactly, but at least half of it. The composition of natural uranium was very complicated. In addition to uranium compounds, it was usually accompanied by many radioactive substances. Most of them were secondary products of decay. Some of them had completely lost their radioactivity and became stable, while others were still in the process of decay. Although the radioactive people had refined the ore when they built the Temple of the Cursed, the basic composition was still the same, which could be seen from Lucia's results. Uranium-238, which could not be used as a weapon, could be recognized by the magic ceremony cube and was almost as effective as uranium-235. Therefore, all of it was sent to the backyard of the North Slope Mountain. Uranium-235, which could be regarded as a weapon if its purity was above 90%, was very low in nature, accounting for only 1% of natural uranium. Therefore, the first obstacle for those who wanted to use the brilliant radiation route was refining it, which was also a hurdle that most people could not overcome. However, it was not the rarest element. Its subsequent decay products, such as thorium, radium, radon, and polonium, were all extremely rare. What Roland needed was the naturally occurring polonium-210, which was the most common isotope in the plutonium family. As the flower of his motherland, Roland was very familiar with radium and polonium. Madame Curie, who had repeatedly mentioned them in textbooks, was famous for discovering them. Although the half-life of polonium-210 was only more than 100 days and its content was appallingly low, Madame Curie's many attempts to extract it had failed. She still pointed out its existence from the strong radioactivity shown by the ore solution. Both radium and polonium could be used to make neutron sources, which was related to the second obstacle of the brilliant radiation, detonation. The principle of the first generation of nuclear weapons was very simple. It could be summed up in one sentence: the fission of nuclides releases energy. In the case of uranium, after uranium-235 received a neutron, it would be excited into unstable uranium-236, and then split into two lighter nuclides and more free neutrons. The mass difference between the two would be converted into energy. Obviously, the released neutrons would hit other nuclides, and the cycle would continue, forming a chain reaction. At the same time, a huge burst of energy would be no different from an explosion. However, in the microscopic world, the gap between atomic nuclei was as wide as heaven and earth. As was written in textbooks, if the atom was seen as a football field, then the nucleus was just an ant on it. If one was unlucky, the neutron would soon fly out of the field, and the reaction would stop. To ensure that every ant would be hit, it was necessary to pile up enough football fields around it to ensure that no matter which direction the neutron flew in, there would be an ant in its path. Reflected in the macroscopic world, it was obvious that mass and shape. In fact, the critical mass was not a fixed value. For example, the probability of being hit by a football field arranged in a straight line was obviously lower than that of a stacked football field. the specific result required a lot of calculations based on the shape of the critical mass. Roland had even heard an anecdote that someone had lost a war because of a wrong calculation. Of course, as a latecomer who stood on the shoulders of giants, he naturally did not have to start from scratch. Countless experiments had proved that the critical mass was the smallest when the object was spherical, and uranium-235 was 52 kilograms. He was already cautious enough to limit the amount of uranium in each lead box to 1 kilogram. However, the so-called critical mass was not fixed. If the area of the football field could be greatly reduced, or if enough extra neutrons were provided for the nuclides, the critical mass would be greatly reduced. The former was the principle of the internal explosion bomb. The detonator was placed outside the bomb, and when it exploded, the reactants would be squeezed together, causing the density to increase sharply and surpass the critical mass. With the current technology in Neverwinter, it was too difficult to calculate the critical mass of an irregular unit or to accurately control the detonation of an explosive. Therefore, Roland set his sights on the latter. Chapter 1196. The neutron source could be understood as a fission catalyst. With the extra neutrons provided by the neutron source, even uranium-235, which was below the critical mass, could be efficiently split. In theory, polonium and radium separated from uranium or could be combined with beryllium to form a neutron source. There were no technical difficulties involved. Beryllium could release a large number of neutrons when it was bombarded by alpha particles. As long as they were put together, the neutron source would work. All three were naturally occurring substances. Compared with man-made elements that were extremely difficult to process or required complex production processes, the neutron source was undoubtedly more feasible. Roland chose beryllium over radium purely for safety reasons. Although the half-life of polonium-210 was short, it mostly decayed by alpha photons and produced very little gamma photons. In other words, as long as it was not eaten, it was almost as safe as uranium. However, radium was different. Whether it produced radon gas after it decayed or gamma photons emitted by itself, it was a safety hazard that could not be ignored. In order to avoid accidents during the experiment, beryllium neutron source was the most suitable choice. In addition, beryllium also reflected neutrons. If it was used as a shell, it could further increase the efficiency of neutron utilization. If both beryllium and beryllium were used at the same time, together with enough uranium-235, even the simplest and most reliable gun structure could achieve a good result. Beryllium was widely found in emeralds. Such a distinctive mineral saved Ozima the trouble of traveling far and wide to find it. All she needed to do was to spread the news through merchants and widely purchase it in the Four Kingdoms. Roland was very clear about the level of technology in Neverwinter. The principle of resplendent radiation was simple, but every 10% increase in efficiency was a threshold. From 1% to 90%, it required a large number of theoretical calculations and experimental corrections. If the energy release efficiency could not be reached, it would be impossible to miniaturize the weapon, and the weapon-grade uranium that they had painstakingly accumulated would be wasted. Without Lucia, the cost of refining would be an insurmountable peak. But at the same time, if you could afford it or didn't care about the losses, rubbing a nuclear bomb in your hands was no joke. The technical thresholds varied greatly, but the principle was the same. Thanks to the natural advantage of mass energy conversion over chemical gunpowder, even if only 1% of uranium was involved in the fission, it would be powerful enough to reverse the situation. In this battle of life and death that would determine the fate of the race, he would do his best. Moreover, stealing the divine fire in such a barbaric era and shortening the distance between humans and the sun itself was a kind of romance, wasn't it? As long as there was a chance, he was willing to give it a try. Good, keep it like this, Roland patted Lucia's head and said, when all the lead cabinets are filled, we can start the official experiment. Yes, Your Majesty, Lucia said energetically. At the same time, in the Air Knight Academy in Neverwinter. This area, which was located to the west of the new research institute, was quiet. Today was a day off for the students. Most of them had left early to enjoy the time with their families. Good was an exception. Take the upper hand, press the pole. Crosswind, roll. He sat on the simulated cockpit and set the wind direction for himself while responding according to the rules in the flight manual. The wooden rod squeaked like an old water wheel that was in disrepair. The temperature in the training room was quite stuffy. After practicing for a long time, his back was soaked with sweat. Beads of sweat dripped from his chin from time to time and scattered on the simple instrument panel. Good did not stop until the handle slipped. He leaned against the chair and heaved a sigh of relief. After nearly half a year of learning, he was no longer the ignorant layman. Although he could not say that he could recite the flight manual written by Her Highness fluently, he could say that all the basic operations were imprinted in his mind. In the beginning, he was in a flurry when he boarded the cockpit. Now, he could operate according to the password even with his eyes closed. If he gave the command to himself, he would not even need to say it out loud. As long as he thought of the command, his body would respond immediately. But could this really make him fly? No matter how hard he tried, he could not picture the scene of flying against the wind in his mind. Capture the direction and strength of the wind, feel the posture and vibration of the body, and then exert the corresponding operating force. These were the original words in the manual, but he did not know what kind of feeling it was. Whether he gently pulled the handle halfway or completely, the cockpit would not give him any feedback. As for the instrument panel, drawn with ink lines, it was more like a mockery of his efforts. The more proficient he became, the more frustrated Good felt. Just when he was a little upset, the door of the training room was suddenly pushed open with a squeak. "You're really here, what do you think? Am I right?" Good turned around and looked at the two people who walked into the room in surprise. They were Finkin and Heinz, who were in the same team. "Why are you? Don't you want to have fun during your vacation?" Finkin whistled. "Because the fun is in the academy. As for you, it's fine if you don't have a family, but don't you have a cute sister?" Heinz stepped forward and put his arm around Good's neck. "She asked me to tell you not to tire yourself out." TSK, how nice." Good's expression suddenly tensed up. "Wait, you two went to my place?" "Of course. Where else could we find you?" Finkin raised his eyebrows. "Her name is Rachel, right? How about introducing her to us?" "Don't even think about it." Good glared back at Finkin. "Are you saying that we're not good enough?" Finkin protested. "At least I have a formal house in the Redwater River community." Good was silent for a moment and finally shook his head helplessly. "It's none of your business. It's my sister's. Rachel's problem. You don't want to be with her." "Why?" "I think she's a good girl," Heinz said confusedly. "Tell me about it." Finkin was also curious. "Don't ask this," Good said grumpily. "Tell me something else. What do you mean by having fun?" Finkin did not continue the topic. He lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "Do you want to try a real plane?" Good was stunned. "What did you say?" "I saw it when I was climbing the wall a few days ago," Finkin said with a proud smile. "There are several new airplanes in the hangar. Although they're covered with cloth, they're similar in size to the unicorn that Her Highness is piloting. In other words, those planes were prepared for us. A few days ago. Why didn't you tell me then?" "I was afraid that you'd be too excited and leak the news," Finkin said with a shrug. "Today is a holiday and there are only a few people in the academy. It's a good opportunity to sneak in and see what it looks like." "Are you crazy?" Good said in disbelief. "Without permission, we can't enter the airport." "Those soldiers won't let you in either," Finkin said as he rolled his eyes at him. "Of course we'll take another way, and we won't go through the airport." "But we're just going to have a look," Heinz said. "You should feel it. Her Highness Tilly has been smiling less recently, and her training has become stricter. At this rate, we may have to wait for a month or two before we can touch it. Compared to this simple wooden platform, don't you want to see what the plane we're going to fly looks like in advance?" "If you don't want to go, we'll go first," Finkin said with a frown. Chapter 1197. Just as Finkin had said, there were not many people in the vast academy. The three of them passed through the buildings and finally stopped in front of a towering wall. This is the west wall of the flying field. Finkin took out a wooden ladder from a corner and placed it on the wall. Follow me. Good hesitated for a moment, but he still followed Finkin and climbed up. When he reached the top of the wall, he could not help but exclaim in a low voice. The slanting sun was slowly approaching the sea, and the glistening waves reflected the center of the sea in a golden hue. The sky that had turned from blue to yellow seemed to have an additional layer of thickness. The clouds above their heads extended all the way to the horizon, like a slope sliding into the sea. The empty and flat flying field beneath their feet was the starting point for them to ascend into the sky. The sea breeze blew across the land, instantly dispelling the frustration in his chest. He could not help but close his eyes and slowly stretch out his hands. He imagined himself hovering in the air with a joystick in his hands, waiting for the command to take off. The view is nice, right? Finkin chuckled. This is a treasure land that I discovered. The only thing we need to be careful is not to fall. Heinz was the last to climb up the wall. Phew, what should we do next? Of course we go there. He pointed to a row of warehouses not far away. The seagull seemed to have come out from one of these warehouses. The end of the warehouse was not far from the wall, about 2 meters apart. But we have to bring the ladder. The three of them were no strangers to walking on the narrow top of the wall. Their usual balance training was also done on a single plank bridge. After a quarter of an hour, they approached their destination. These warehouses were about 2 to 3 meters higher than the wall. It was not practical to climb up directly, but the tall windows were just opposite the top of the wall. As long as they stood on tiptoe, they could see inside the warehouse. Masked plane. Masked plane. Ah, found it. Finkin suddenly stopped and said. Good followed his gaze, and his heart skipped a beat. There were 4 biplanes neatly placed in a warehouse, but they were not covered with linen. Instead, they were openly displayed in front of the three of them. The smooth wings and smooth bodies made it difficult for Good to take his eyes off them. The thought that one day he could pilot such an incredible thing and soar with the birds made him extremely excited. So what if he was a knight? The sky was where he should be. Finkin put the ladder on the windowsill and clapped his hands in satisfaction. In this way, we're not in violation of the no-entry order. Although he knew that there was an obvious loophole in this explanation, Good could not resist the impulse in his heart. He followed the man into the storeroom through the high window. What was inconceivable was that after seeing the real thing, his uneasy mood calmed down. After landing, the two of them ran to the nearest plane at the same time, and he walked at the back. Wow, this is really amazing. Heinz touched the fuselage and said, it looks like it's made of metal. That's right, and it's as thin as a layer of skin. Look, Finkin pressed his finger hard, and a small dent appeared on the surface. I really don't know how it's made. Hey, be careful. It's over if you break it. Don't worry, it's very elastic. Really? Let me try too. Unlike the two of them, Good did not circle around the plane in amazement. He felt like he was being pulled by something and climbed into the plane along the lower wing. There seemed to be a voice in his heart, guiding him to the nose of the plane. On the cover of the flight manual, Princess Royal Highness was sitting in that position, turning the land and the sea into a painting under her. Then, Good stepped into the pilot's seat and sat firmly on the seat. So, this is what the world looks like in the eyes of the aerial knight. The long straight wings on top of his head and the supporting frame on both sides blocked most of his vision, but it also focused his eyes on the front. The chair behind him was wrapped in soft leather, and he could even smell the milky smell of new leather. The instrument panel was no longer painted on a wooden board, but was covered with transparent glass. The control stick and pedals were made of metal, and the top of the control stick was covered with a layer of semi-soft gelatinous material, which was comfortable and not slippery. Good held the control stick and pulled it down slightly. Suddenly, he heard a clicking sound behind him. Different from the wooden pole on the training platform, he felt that he was indeed pulling something. The vibrating steel wire gave him clear feedback, instead of the feeling of emptiness and powerlessness he had felt before. As he continued to pull, the control stick became heavier and heavier, as if it was responding to his movements. "My God, what are you doing?" Heinz's voice interrupted his thoughts. Good suddenly let go of his hand. You want to practice?" Finkin teased. "Who said I was crazy? As soon as we arrived, you climbed into the pilot's seat without saying a word. Didn't you say you were just going to look?" "Sorry, I couldn't help it, don't worry," he interrupted. "Since this is what we've been training, it won't break if we try it. But after you're done, come down quickly. I haven't been inside yet." "Wait a little longer," Good said reluctantly. "I just tried to pull the lever. Why don't you sit in the back seat first?" "Wait, what about me?" Heinz also climbed onto the wing of the plane. Just as the three of them were scrambling for the seat, a shrill unlocking sound came from the closed door. Good's expression changed drastically. Heinz also panicked. Why would someone come at this time? What should we do?" Only Finkin remained calm. "It's too late to run. Let's hide first." However, there was no place to hide in the spacious hangar, and the seats were too narrow to fit 3 adults. Before they could climb off the plane, someone had already entered the hangar. "Who's that?" "Stop. Don't move." With a series of cracking sounds, Good found himself surrounded by the guards of the First Army. Facing the loaded guns, the 3 of them did not dare to resist. Soon, they were pressed to the ground. "What's going on?" A familiar figure appeared in front of them. It was Princess Tilly Wimbledon. "Intruders?" Before the guards could answer, Finkin had already lowered his head and shouted, "Your Highness, we were wrong. We're all students of the first batch. We just wanted to see what the plane we're going to pilot looks like, so we snuck in. Please forgive us." "So you also know that it's against the rules," Good complained in his heart. "This is the end." After asking all the questions, Her Royal Highness nodded expressionlessly. "I see. According to the rules, you'll be confined for more than 15 days and lose the qualification to become an air knight forever. As for whether you'll be a ground crew or a chores officer, it's up to you. Go back and report to your superior." Yes. The 2 of them said bitterly. Good's heart immediately sank. Seeing that the guards were about to drag them out, he somehow mustered up the courage to raise his head and shout, "Your Highness, please. I just want to be a pilot. I'm willing to do anything for it. And I think I lack the feeling of flying. No matter how much I practice, it won't help me. That's why I'm here, not just because I'm curious." "Oh." Tilly suddenly raised her eyebrows. "You mean, feeling?" "Yes, I can't match the rules in the manual with the operation. It's like I'm flying, but I can't feel the wind." No, it should be." He thought hard. "I don't know how to describe it. I just feel that no matter how hard I practice, I can't coordinate." "Nonsense. What kind of reason is that? TSK, is this guy crazy? Hurry up and drag him away, lest he annoys Princess Tilly." There was a murmur among the guards. Tilly, on the other hand, looked at him thoughtfully. "You're good, right? I remember Eagle Face reported that your grades are pretty good. You're also the first one to adapt to the magic movie training, and you practice very hard." Before he could speak, she interrupted him. "How was it? The feeling of boarding the plane?" Good was stunned. "Didn't you say you lack the feeling of flying? How about now? Do you think you can fly?" He hesitated, clenched his fists, and said, "Your Highness. I think I can." "Then give it a try." Tilly turned around and no longer looked at him. "In fact, I plan to start the real plane training tomorrow. For others, they can always try again if they fail, but you don't. If you fail, you'll be expelled from the academy. Of course, you can also accept the punishment. You can choose. I want to fly. This time, Good answered almost without hesitation. Chapter 1198. After dinner, Roland heard about it from Tilly. Because of the feeling. He was stunned when Tilly told him the reason for changing her mind. Why? Can't I? Tilly crossed her arms. No, the rules of the Aerial Knight Academy are set by you. Of course, you have the final say. Roland quickly waved his hand. I'm just curious. What does the feeling represent? It represents talent. Sure enough, you don't know anything about flying. Tilly shrugged. For most people, practicing is nothing more than completing tasks according to the instructions in the manual. Apart from performing the actions themselves, there is nothing else, even in the sky. But some people can visualize every action, and before they take action, they can already see the result of the action. Isn't that amazing? Roland twitched his mouth. He did not deny that he knew nothing about flying. Without Tilly's help, the Aerial Knight project would have been impossible. It was impossible to build a qualified plane based on the blueprints in the dream world. Whether it was the trial production, improvement, finalization, or training, Tilly's participation was indispensable. If it were an ordinary person, it might take decades to turn the blueprints into a real plane and then use the plane in combat. But the plane was a machine, after all. Shouldn't the machine be operated according to the manual and repeated practice? Because that's how I am. Tilly showed a look of regret. If you can't imagine it, it means you don't have the talent in this area. Brother, if you are also a member of the Aerial Knight Academy, I'm afraid you will be eliminated. Ahem. Roland almost choked on his own saliva, and Nightingale's laughter came from behind him. Do you think you can master flying just by practicing? Tilly seemed to read his mind. There are indeed some people who can connect the action with the feeling after thousands of practice, but don't forget that this is a talent in itself, just slightly inferior to the former. Most people would never be able to reach this step. Just being able to fly was already not an easy feat. Who do you think has a better chance of surviving the war? Roland was speechless. Without a doubt, the answer was outstanding talent. Spending the same amount of time to train, these types of people would often be able to reach a higher level and quickly accumulate experience in battle. Meanwhile, those with mediocre abilities would find it difficult to even protect themselves, let alone improve further. In terms of the cost-effectiveness of training, the former could be several times that of the latter. But we can't be sure of anything with just one explanation, right? He was silent for a while before he said, after all, there's still the possibility of a coincidence. That's why you'll know everything after flying once, Tilly said indifferently. What about the other two? They all chose to test the flight. Oh. Roland blinked in surprise. Expelling the Knight Academy was not a light punishment in this era, especially when the head of the academy was Her Royal Highness. It would leave a disgraceful mark on his resume, and it would be much more difficult to apply for other jobs in the future. Secondly, the ground crew and chores were paid well, and it was also a stable job. They could also enjoy some preferential policies from the academy, such as housing and medical care. Compared with the former and the latter, there was a big difference. They're brave. Don't you think it's a pity to expel them like this? After all, there were less than 200 trainee pilots in Neverwinter, and each one was precious. The Air Knight Academy doesn't need people without talent. Courage is just a suicide mission in the face of devil beasts. It's better to let them leave as soon as possible, Tilly said in a low voice. At this point, the atmosphere in the office became a little tense. Just when Roland was about to pour a drink to ease the atmosphere, Tilly took the initiative to change the topic. By the way, I wanted to ask you about the previous matter. Do you have any clue about my new plane? Sure enough, she did not come to the office just to talk about work. Roland's heart skipped a beat. I think we can discuss this in the long run. The establishment of the Air Force is inseparable from you. Besides, if you stay in Neverwinter, you'll be a greater threat to the demons." Tilly did not answer, but her burning eyes showed her attitude. Roland sighed inwardly. The new plane did not refer to the unicorn, but a more powerful flying weapon suitable for combat. After Ash's death, Tilly cried in his arms for a long time. She was as sad as a helpless child, but that was also the last time he saw her weak side. When she woke up, the first thing she said to him was, "I want a plane that can kill demons." She wanted to take revenge on the demons. Although Roland had used a lot of excuses at that time, Tilly obviously did not change her mind. "Do you really want to do this? You didn't have so many concerns when you ambushed Osrook. That's transportation. It's completely different from a head-on battle. In fact, there's not much difference. I'm using my ability where it's most needed." Tilly shook her head. "I agreed with this view, so I persuaded Ashes to go to the front. You also know that if you want to take back the sky from the demons, the current Air Knight can't guarantee victory. Neverwinter is at a disadvantage both in terms of quantity and level. Only I can reverse this situation. But the Academy, of course I'll take responsibility. Before the war, as long as I train a group of qualified instructors, they can continue to expand and pass on the Air Knight team." Tilly was silent for a moment. She stared at Roland and said word by word, "I know it's a little capricious, but this is my only request, brother." Roland looked at her for a long time and finally let out a long sigh. "I understand." Tilly loosened her clenched fists. "Thank you. By the way, do you have any requirements for the color of the fuselage?" Roland suddenly asked when she was about to leave. Puzzled, Tilly stopped and said, "No, since there's no specific requirement, how about red?" "What's the difference?" "Generally, the protagonists who dominate the sky use this color," Roland said softly. "Really?" Tilly slightly raised the corner of her mouth. "Then we'll do as you said, use red." When the door closed, Nightingale said with a complicated expression, "Her Highness, she's serious." Roland rubbed his forehead as if he had a headache. "That's why it's so troublesome." When Tilly said, "my only request," he could even feel her strong obsession and hope. There was no one else but him who could help her realize her desire for revenge. If he refused and let this hope turn into despair, he vaguely realized that he might lose her. "She's also changed." Nightingale sighed. "But I can understand her. If you're the one in trouble." She paused for a while and then shook her head as if giving up. "No, I don't even dare to think about it." Roland could not help but fall silent. He suddenly remembered a saying, "War will change many things and people, but the only thing that will not change is war itself." Chapter 1199. Good did not even know how he got back to the temporary residence. By the time he arrived at his house, it was already dusk. People who had been busy the whole day were returning to their residences one after another. Smoke and shouts could be heard everywhere. The fragrance of porridge mixed with the sour smell of sweat showed how busy this place was. Although there was an endless amount of work to be done every day, everyone's expressions were full of energy. It didn't look like a refugee settlement at all. And what gave them energy was hope. As long as they were busy for a day, they would be able to fill their stomachs for several days. If they were busy for 10 days to half a month, they would be able to add 2 eggs or a piece of steak to their bowl. Therefore, people naturally had expectations. If they were busy for a year and a half, what would they become? With this hope in mind, everyone's voice became more energetic. Although the temporary housing area was dirty and noisy, it was not as dark and gloomy as the slums. Everything here was colorful. Except for Good. The more he looked at the smiles of his neighbors, the more dizzy he felt. There seemed to be a voice echoing in his heart, "Look what you've done, idiot. You've ruined everything that you've worked so hard for." That's right. If he hadn't shouted and accepted the punishment, he would still be a student of the Aerial Knight Academy. Even if he could not be a driver, it would still be a good job, at least much better than being a refugee. He had answered without hesitation at that time, but when Her Royal Highness really agreed, his courage receded like the tide and was replaced by guilt and fear. If he failed, he would really have nothing. Good opened the door absent-mindedly and walked into the house. A clear voice rang out. "Good, you're back. Look at what I've done." Rachel ran to him cheerfully, pushed him to the table, and opened the porcelain pot covering the plate. "Dang dang dang dang, egg pancake, how is it?" The egg and wheat cake were divided into 2 layers. It was not so much an egg pancake, but more like a fried egg on a wheat cake. However, this was not a failed dish. The egg white was spread very thin, with a circle of yellow curls around it. The orange egg heart was slightly raised, still retaining the smoothness when it had not yet solidified. The melted butter was sandwiched between the two and dripped into the plate through the gap, giving off a tempting aroma. Obviously, Rachel had put a lot of effort into this dinner. Good was startled. "You bought eggs?" Although the prices in Neverwinter were not high, it was still not a regular dish for them. "Yes." Rachel handed him the wooden fork. "I went to the convenience market with Uncle Baggy today. Don't worry, I still have some savings left. It's rare for you to have a day off, so it's not a problem to eat once in a while. Besides, if you become an official Ariel Knight, your savings will rise back very quickly." "I know that." She even patted her chest after saying that. Good took the fork stiffly. You're right. Don't say anything else." "Try my skills first," Rachel said expectantly. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly forked the soft egg and put it into his mouth. In an instant, the heart of the egg gushed out and blended with the mellow flavor of the butter, instantly filling his entire mouth. At the same time, this delicacy struck the deepest part of his heart. They had suffered a lot when they fled from the kingdom of Wolfheart to the western region of Greycastle. They did not even dare to dream of eating such delicious food. But after he came to Neverwinter, the situation miraculously improved. Not only did he have a stable place to live, but he could also live a carefree life. Rachel might even be able to eat the egg pancake he ate every day instead of watching him eat it, as long as he continued to stay in the academy. Indeed, he longed to fly to the blue sky, but was it really worth it to sacrifice everything? In the past, he had nothing to lose, but now it was different. He had promised to take good care of her. If that was the case, why did he make such a selfish choice? He even agreed to peep at the plane with Finkin because he only thought about himself. Now, such a selfish person was eating the food made by Finkin. It was so hateful, wasn't it? How about it? It's not bad, right? I haven't done this for a long time. I don't know if my skills have deteriorated. Rachel put her fingers together and said, "Hey, can you do it or not? Say something." "Wait, why are you crying? Did I do that badly?" "No." Good cried while stuffing food into his mouth. "It's delicious. It's so delicious. I just couldn't help it." Rachel was stunned for a moment. Then she stood up and walked to his side. She reached out her hand to press his head and asked softly, "What happened?" "I'm sorry. I might not be able to stay in the academy anymore." Intermittently, Good told him everything he had done. "I see." Rachel was silent for a long time. She waited for him to calm down before she said, "I just want to ask you a question. Do you like flying?" "I." Good opened his mouth, but under Rachel's gaze, he found that he could not say anything against his will. After a long time, he nodded. "That's good," Rachel said with a smile. "This is the first time you've done something you want to do, right? I was the one who offered to take me away from that place. You've done a lot for me in the kingdom of Wolfheart and on the way to escape. These things should have nothing to do with you. How could you be a selfish guy? But the worst result is that I have to start from scratch, right?" She tilted her head and said, "And I'm literate. Even if I don't do those things, I can still find a lot of work. So, no matter whether it works or not, I just have to try my best. Is this really okay? It's too late to regret. It's better to stop thinking about other things and focus on this. Of course, next time you encounter such a thing, you should think twice. Don't be impulsive. Good stared at her for a while. I think sometimes you know more than I do. Age doesn't equal knowledge. You insisted on making me your sister, Rachel muttered. Then she smiled and said, if you're expelled from the academy, you can just call me sister. The next day, Air Night Airport. The 16 preparatory team members stood in a row at the end of the runway. As the first batch of qualified candidates, they would be the first to accept the test flight. Four brand new planes slowly glided out of the hangar and stopped in front of them. There was a commotion in the crowd. Everyone looked at the four beautiful planes with great interest and whispered to each other excitedly. Finkin and Heinz, on the other hand, looked gloomy. Good closed his eyes. Feeling the cool morning breeze blowing against his face, he tried to grasp the feeling in his mind, the day after day of training, the instructor's teaching, and the moment when he held the real machine's handle. Several images kept rotating, and gradually, they became inseparable. When Tilly appeared in front of the team, everyone knelt on one knee. Finkin even gave Good a hand. Your Royal Highness. Get up. Tilly glanced at them expressionlessly. Although it's the first time you've seen these planes, you're familiar with them. Both the illustrations in the textbooks and the principles you learn are based on the unicorn. These planes are the optimized version of the unicorn, which is more stable in performance. As long as you follow the training steps, you'll be able to fly the simplest flight. However, considering that it's your first time in the air, I'll fly near the pilot's seat as an instructor and tell you what to do step by step. You'll be graded according to your performance. Of course, if I don't say anything, that's the best performance. She paused for a moment and then said, however, I don't rule out the possibility that someone might make a mistake or even crash in such a simple operation. Therefore, I've invited Miss Nana. She's in the airport now. As long as you don't die immediately, you'll be able to survive. However, that also means that your score will be greatly discounted. If you can't improve after training, you'll be kicked out of the team. Therefore, I hope you can do your best and do your best. In addition, if you make a serious mistake that causes the plane to be damaged, your score will be reduced to 0. After all, the academy doesn't have that many planes for you to waste. Do you understand? Yes, Your Royal Highness. The 16 students said in unison. Then let's begin. The first pilot, Good, Tilly said in a low voice. Chapter 1200. A guard inserted the handle into the nose of the plane, turned it several times, and then suddenly pressed down on the throttle. A violent tremor suddenly spread from the nose to the tail. In this tremor, the engine made a series of popping sounds, driving the propeller to run quickly. When the roar turned into a continuous buzzing sound, Good followed the instructions in the manual and slowly pushed the throttle lever. The plane seemed to be pulled by something and slid onto the runway. Wow! There was a burst of exclamation from the crowd. It actually worked. Good was also greatly encouraged. It was acting according to his instructions, and he was driving this big guy. He could not help but look at Her Royal Highness, who was squatting on the left side of the wing. He saw her gray hair fluttering in the wind, and her eyes seemed to be smiling. Was the princess praising him? Good became more confident. Next, as long as he followed her instructions, there should be no problem flying. However, after more than 10 breaths, there was still no instruction from his side. Good repeatedly looked at Tilly, but all he got was a faint smile. When the plane crossed the middle line of the runway, he suddenly realized a fact: he would not receive any instructions. But considering that this is your first time flying, I will fly near the pilot's seat as a guide, and remind you step by step what to do. This sentence did not include him. Her Royal Highness was taking care of ordinary students, not him, who had violated the rules and made mistakes. Just like other students who failed, they could always try again, but he only had one chance. Good suddenly felt his hands and feet cold, and the sense of loss and regret from yesterday surged into his heart again. Being able to make me not say anything is undoubtedly the best performance. He vaguely guessed what Her Royal Highness was thinking. If he could not rely on his own ability to fly, if he could not get the best results, then the Academy would not allow him to stay. This was the price of making mistakes. Only by showing enough ability would he have the value to continue to stay here. But could he really make this plane fly? At this time, only 1/3 of the runway was left, and there was a grassland at the end, and further away was the wall of the airport. If he directly crashed into it, even Miss Nana would not be able to do anything. No. It's too late. Good instinctively wanted to pull on the accelerator. This seemed to be the only way to save his life. He wanted to slow down and avoid a head-on collision. When faced with an unavoidable high wall, this was almost an instinctive choice. But in the next moment, he felt a hand on his head. "Do you like flying?" Rachel's voice sounded like it was right beside his ear. "Flying, that's right. If it was a bird, there was another way out. That was to fly over the top of the wall. If he retracted his wings now, there would be nothing left." After what seemed like a moment, and also like a long time, Good's hand that was tightly gripping the handle moved again. However, he did not pull it back, but pushed it forward. The nose of the plane let out a roar. The wall seemed to be crashing into him. It was not until the last 10 meters that he abruptly pulled the nose up. With a shake of the fuselage, the runway suddenly disappeared from his sight, replaced by the rapidly passing grassland. For a moment, he felt weightless, as if his body was as light as a swallow. The earth was falling, and he was rising into the sky. Faster, just a little faster. Good widened his eyes and stared at the edge of the wall that was getting closer and closer. He was even ready to receive the impact. But that moment did not come. The plane almost skimmed over the top of the wall and rushed into the blue sky. When the obstacle in front of him completely disappeared, a scene that he had never seen before appeared in front of him. The silhouette of the Academy, the shape of the coast, and the distant city of Neverwinter were reflected in his vision one by one. They rotated along with his movements, and the blowing morning breeze filled the last gap in his senses. At this moment, he found the benchmark that he had practiced day after day. Such a free experience made him want to shout out loud. It was really great that humans could fly. After the plane landed, Good knelt in front of Her Highness. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity. You let me see the scene that I could only see in my dreams." During the nearly half-an-hour test flight, he basically completed several major standard movements such as pulling up and hovering. Although the process was a little bumpy, he finally completed them one by one. As for how many points he would get in the end, he could only leave it to fate. Even if he still did not meet the requirements of the princess, at least he had left an unforgettable memory. From now on, as long as he closed his eyes, the world would suddenly expand a lot. "Why did you join the Air Knight Academy?" Tilly's voice came from above his head. Good hesitated for a moment and finally decided to tell the truth. "Your Highness, at first I wanted to earn more money, then I wanted to stand out, and now I want to fly. Whether it's money, fame, or flying, I can give it to you, as long as you can kill enough demons." The princess's statement was as calm as ice. "Fight for Greycastle, pilot the plane to kill every demon that appears in sight, and use their blood to exchange for everything. This is the duty of the Air Knight, and also the purpose of the Academy. If you can do it, report back to Eagle Face." Good looked up excitedly and said, "Your Highness, you mean, you pass." Tilly walked to the line without looking back. It was not until 5 o'clock in the afternoon that the first round of flight test came to an end. 2 of the 16 people were eliminated, but fortunately, they all survived. Finkin and Heinz passed the test right after Good. When it was time to disperse, the 2 of them grabbed Good and dragged him to the side of the field. "Are you crazy? Her Highness Tilly said that it would be considered a pass if you succeeded in flying, but you hesitated at the beginning and didn't increase your speed. Not only did you almost hit the wall, but you also flew out of the Academy district and circled in the sea. Aren't you afraid of falling into the sea and drowning? That was an accident. Good rolled his eyes and said, Didn't Her Highness ask us to do our best before we took off? I didn't know that I would pass as long as I could pull up and land. I just thought that the total score of several actions would be higher than one. You're lucky. Finkin shook his head helplessly. You're not bad, either. He curled his lips and said, You took off so decisively without any instructions. What? What do you mean by no instructions? Didn't Her Highness tell you when to pull the lever? Yes, it's just that she gave us fewer instructions than the others, Heinz echoed. After all, we all made mistakes. Good could not help but be stunned. Was he the only one among them who had not received any instructions at all? The three of them returned to the dormitory area in bewilderment and confusion. As soon as they entered the gate, Good saw Eagle Face standing on the field with a frosty face. The three of them shuddered at the same time. In a sense, the trainees were more afraid of this instructor than the Princess Royal, especially Eagle Face's eyes. When they were stared at, they were like prey with nowhere to escape. "Yes, sir. You're quite capable. It's not easy for you to have a day off, but you still caused trouble for me." He glanced coldly at Good and the others. "I've heard from Her Highness Tilly that you should be glad that you haven't joined the army, and this is not the jurisdiction of the First Army, otherwise." "Sir, we were wrong." The three of them hurriedly apologized in the most sincere tone. "Since Her Highness has already punished us, I won't say anything more. But as long as you want to be an Air Knight, you'll become a member of the army sooner or later." Eagle Face stopped sneering and said seriously, "In order to deepen your impression of me and avoid making the same mistake again, in the next month, you'll be responsible for cleaning the toilets. Do you understand?" "Ah." Finkin and Heinz immediately put on a bitter face. Good was the only one who raised his hand and saluted excitedly. Chapter 1201. The test flight, which lasted for nearly a week, was a crucial step for the Air Knight Academy. The training of the preparatory students was finally on the right track, but its impact was far from limited to the academy. In fact, on that day, some people had already noticed the giant kite hovering over the southern part of the city. Although Tilly occasionally flew the unicorn over the Lord's castle, most of the time she chose to conduct the test in the uninhabited area. Most people had only heard of the existence of the plane, but had never seen it with their own eyes. The Air Knight Academy did not have to worry about this. Curious people went to the southern part of the city and gathered on both sides of the road, waiting for the moment when the plane flew over the wall. At first, it was only limited to the residents near the shallow port and the factory area. However, as the news spread quickly, by the third day, the academy was surrounded by a group of onlookers. Every time a plane appeared in their field of vision, the crowd would burst into enthusiastic cheers and exclamations, as if they were the ones flying into the blue sky. Honey seized the opportunity and used the title, "Miracle Happens Again," as the title, using a large page to report the test being carried out in the academy, and attached a clear close-up photo of the biplane. In an instant, the sales of the Grey Castle Weekly soared to a new peak. There was even a buying frenzy in Neverwinter. Perhaps realizing the business opportunity, many foreign businessmen began to buy newspapers from the public at a high price after the weekly expense report was sold out. Those who did not have enough money would hire someone to copy the newspapers and even hand-draw the photos of the plane. For a while, the paper price in the market was very high. Thanks to this, the name of the Air Knight Academy finally spread throughout Neverwinter. A week later, Roland received the summary report from Tilly. Among the 197 preparatory students, a total of 150 had passed the test, which meant that there were a total of 47 crashes caused by operational errors during the whole test period. Considering that there were only 4 planes in the first batch, each plane crashed more than 11 times on average. It sounded a little unbelievable, but Roland knew that the structure of these planes was simple and light. As long as the engine was not damaged, it could be repaired quickly. In addition, most of the crashes occurred during the landing phase. It was either because the speed was too slow and the entire plane slammed into the runway, or because the speed was too fast and broke the landing wheels, only stopping due to friction with the plane's belly. Such damage was common in the era of biplanes, and it could be dragged back to be repaired. It would be a good plane again. Of course, patched planes weren't as good as when they left the factory. Tilly also mentioned that the condition of the two planes that could still fly had greatly deteriorated, and it was difficult for them to meet the training requirements. In order to ensure the quality of teaching, the Academy urgently needed a new batch of biplanes. In addition, due to the increase in training content and the subsequent expansion of personnel recruitment, for aircraft could no longer meet the requirements. Based on the overall efficiency of the training and the actual needs, at least 12 to 15 of them should be provided. This was also the number of flying squadrons in the future. Roland realized that no matter how he looked at the report, there was only one sentence hidden between the lines: I, the Air Force, send money. After putting down the report, Roland shook his head helplessly. He could only say that Tilly was indeed talented in this aspect. She had seen through the essence of the Air Force at the beginning stage. In fact, to form a qualified flying unit, there must be a large number of people for screening, and there must be enough planes for them to crash. Neither of the two could be dispensed. Now that all industries in Neverwinter were in urgent need of manpower, it was obviously impossible to produce a large number of planes in a short period of time. Roland could only rely on Anna to slowly gather the necessary manpower. In addition to Tilly, the General Staff also submitted an observation report, written by Edith Kant. The report was very short, but the content was quite interesting. The Pearl of the Northern Region believed that as long as it was used properly, the aerial night could possibly change the situation of the future war, or even become a decisive force in the war. She hoped to select a group of people from the General Staff to set up a research group to be stationed in the Academy to understand the performance of this new weapon, so that it could be used in the future plans. At the same time, she also conceived some tactics that only the aerial knight could carry out. She wanted to have a private discussion with Roland. She could not wait any longer. Edith was probably the ordinary person who paid the most attention to the plane among the higher-ups in Neverwinter. The moment she saw the mass production of the plane, she immediately thought of its application in the war. Not to mention the feasibility of the plan, just her acumen alone was really admirable. Just as Roland was about to summon the Pearl of the Northern Region to discuss her views on the aerial night, a guard's voice came from outside the office. Your Majesty, the Minister of Construction, Car Van Bate, requests to see you. He withdrew his hand from the phone and said, "Let him in." Yes, Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Carr walked into the office and bowed respectfully. Your miracle building has been successfully completed. Standing under the podium building and looking up at the towering main body, Roland really felt the charm of the word, wonder. It took nearly 2 years, tens of thousands of golden dragon, enough steel to build 3 redwater bridges, and enough concrete to pile up into a hill to finally complete the building. Without the help of Lotus, Hummingbird, and the other witches, it would have consumed several times more manpower and resources. It was not just a joke that a wonder would harm the country. Similarly, the people of Neverwinter were absolutely shocked by the completion of the building, which could be seen from the people who flocked to watch the completion ceremony from all directions. The so-called gap between the 2 and the 3-story buildings was even clearer when compared to the so-called Wonder Building. Compared to the surrounding 2 to 3-story residential areas, the 56-meter-tall, 15-story Miracle Building could be said to stand out from the rest. Even Roland, who was used to seeing tall buildings, could not help but feel a surge of excitement in his heart. As the new landmark of Neverwinter, it was not a simple and useless project, but the culmination of a variety of new technologies. For example, the water supply and drainage problem. Carr used the method of setting up multi-level water tanks on each floor to solve the problem of not being able to pump water due to the large height difference. In addition, 4 external elevators were installed at the 4 corners of the main building. They were driven by the steam engine in the basement and could carry dozens of people back and forth between the top floor and the bottom floor. Although they were not as intelligent as modern elevators, which had to be operated by special personnel and could not stop at every floor, it was still an amazing design for this era. In particular, the elevators used a large number of floor-to-ceiling glass, so people could overlook the beautiful city while riding, which was totally a pleasure. Your Majesty, say something. After climbing up the podium building, Carr put his hand on his chest and said, "Your people are all waiting for you." Roland nodded, walked to the fence, and waved to the dense crowd below. The crowd immediately burst into enthusiastic cheers. Good afternoon, people of Neverwinter. Today is the day when the miracle building is completed. It is the best in the world, and history will remember this day. But I don't want to talk about its great significance. I want to talk about the question that you are most concerned about. Who will live in it? Or, who will it be built for? Nobles? No, Grey Castle has abolished the right to enfeoff the nobles. The royal family? Of course not. I don't need such a big place to put my bed. The answer is actually very simple. It will be the residents of Neverwinter, that is, all of you. It is you who created the miracle building, and you will undoubtedly enjoy this miracle. Every room will be priced in the administrative office. You don't need special privileges or family background. As long as you bring your resident ID card, you can apply for the purchase and live in this building that is destined to go down in history. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd burst into deafening cheers. Long live His Majesty! Long live Neverwinter! After the cheers subsided, Roland continued loudly, "Now, I will light the torch on the top of the building. From now on, when the night falls, it will burn brightly and become the most dazzling star over Neverwinter." Amid the overwhelming cheers of the crowd, he led the people from City Hall into the elevator, and went up to the top of the main building. A huge stone basin was placed in the center of the roof, filled with pitch-black oil. This sticky heavy oil had been specially processed to not only burn for a long time, but also did not emit a stench or smoke. It was the most suitable fuel for the torch. Your Majesty. Nightingale handed a torch to Roland. Roland nodded, took the torch, and slowly walked to the stone basin. He seemed to hear a gentle song and a familiar line in his mind, "From the beginning of the first life underwater, you have experienced a lot." He raised the corner of his mouth and lowered the torch. Chapter 1202. In the sedimentation bay of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. As one of the only two port cities in the Kingdom of Wolfheart, the docks here were always busy. Every day, there would be many peddlers from the inland who would send goods to the Shanghai ships to sell to other countries, or directly exchange for what they needed from the sea merchants. Therefore, the dock area was quite like a large market, with everything from furs to slaves. White sat in his carriage, bored, and listened to the chatter of the laborers beside him as he gazed in the direction of the sea. Ever since the war between Hermes and Grey Castle, the task of sending orphans to the Holy City had been suspended. White, who had lost his biggest source of income, had become much more miserable. However, the worst was yet to come. The order of the kingdom, which had been overthrown by the church, had not been restored after the war. Small conflicts between the lords continued. A coachman like White, who relied on his carriage business for a living, had basically lost his stable source of income and had to come to the sedimentation bay to find a new job. Although the prosperity of the city was affected to a certain extent, fortunately, the lords did not give up on their pursuit of enjoyment. Moreover, the main road across the Cage Mountain was controlled by the Duncan family, and the luxuries that the other lords wanted were more dependent on sea transportation. Therefore, the city was still as prosperous as before the war. Of course, this also had to do with the fact that the Baron of the Sedimentation Bay had always been neutral. White had also chosen this place for the sake of stability. He was getting old and did not want to travel around anymore. After a few more shipments, he would be able to buy a house in the outer city. At that time, he would be able to make a living by doing some small business. "Uncle, haven't you got any work today?" Suddenly, a young laborer climbed into his carriage with a smile. "Go away. It's none of your business whether I got any work or not." White waved his hand as if he was shooing away a fly. Don't get into my carriage. You can't afford to damage the axle. Don't say that. I'm heavier than the goods. You can see it from here. The latter first patted his open belly, then lay down in the carriage. He picked up a straw at the bottom of the carriage and put it in his mouth. He looked around and asked, "What did you transport last time? Why is there a sour smell in it?" "If you don't get off, I'm going to beat you up," White said impatiently. This guy did not have a name. The other laborers all called him Smarty, but he did not know why. The two of them had nothing to do with each other. They were just busy working at the same dock and had met each other a few times. "With that fake leg of yours that hurts so much that you can't even stand properly on rainy days? It looks like it's going to rain again. Your bones are aching now, aren't they?" White couldn't help but choke. This annoying brat, when did he, don't stare at me like you're going to eat me alive. I'm here to help you find work. Smarty shrugged. There's only so much cargo to transport on a ship. You're old, and you can't squeeze past others, so naturally, you earn less. What are you trying to say? It's very simple. My brothers can help you get a good spot. It's much more useful than you doing it alone. Are you interested? Humph, you won't be working for nothing, White sneered. 10% of the freight. That's fair, right? Smarty smiled. He was silent for a moment. At this moment, the sky above them was a little gloomy. The sea breeze made the corners of their clothes flutter. It was obvious that a heavy rain was coming. If a ship arrived at the port at this time, it would indeed be difficult for him to steal business from others in the same line. The fake leg was both a hindrance to him and a reason for the employers to screen him out. Seeing that White didn't answer, Smarty snapped his fingers. Since you're not refusing, I'll take that as a yes. After a while, White stared at him and said, I'm not the only one you're helping, am I right? Ahem, if everyone can line up, we can save a lot of trouble, can't we? Smarty deliberately ignored the question. Uncle, can't you change the straw into cloth cushions for this carriage? Apart from the chaos drinks from the fjords, the most valuable thing in the sedimentation bay is perfume. Although the buyers are all nobles and usually bring their own carriages, accidents happen to every family, and there's always a need for additional carriages. But your car stinks. Even if we help you get a good seat, the employer might not agree to it. Glancing at the guy who spoke with confidence and composure, White suddenly understood why he was called a smart guy. However, he was not someone to be trifled with. By the way, didn't you ask me what I did last time? What? Cow dung, the kind that's used as firewood, he said slowly. He said slowly, although they've all been dried, it's normal for them to leave some residue after they've been exposed to moisture. Smarty's face suddenly stiffened. He turned his head and spat out the straw in his mouth. He then lay on the carriage frame and coughed. Pfft, he's just a kid after all. White snorted and looked at the sea again. Then he froze. Several three-masted ships appeared at the end of his sight, slowly sailing towards the sedimentation bay. Each of them was a flagship of the fjord's Chamber of Commerce. The main mast was about 30 meters long, and there was a golden flag with a black border on the top of the mast. That was not the emblem of any of the chambers of commerce that White was familiar with. Anyway, as long as there were ships, there would be business. It did not matter which ship he was working for. Besides, there were 3 ships coming at once. Even if he did not ask for help from these laborers, he should be able to get 1 or 2 carts of goods. White jumped off the carriage frame and untied the horse's rope. When he was about to lead the horse to the unloading area, Smarty suddenly reached out and grabbed his clothes. Hey, something's wrong. What could be wrong? White turned his head impatiently, and what he saw left him dumbfounded. Behind the 3 ships, many masts were revealed bit by bit. The raised sails vaguely connected together, forming a white wall on the surface of the sea. Oh my God, when the grayish-black hulls entered his field of vision, they almost covered the original appearance of the sea. At first, White tried to count how many ships there were, but after counting to 50, he found that his eyes could not keep up with the speed of the ship's appearance. 100. 200. No, I'm afraid it's a lot more. Among them, there was no lack of huge three-masted ships, but there were more paddle steamers emitting white smoke. He had occasionally seen these new ships without sails, but now there were so many of them. It was completely beyond his imagination. He swore that even the sailors who lived in the harbor had never seen such a huge fleet. Other people in the harbor also noticed this incredible scene. Whether it was the peddlers, sailors, or laborers, they could not help but put down the work in their hands and held their breath as they watched the mighty fleet approaching. The originally noisy docks suddenly quieted down. As the ships approached, the fluttering flags became clearer. On the golden background, White could vaguely see the emblem of a tower and a spear. All the ships were flying the same flag. When hundreds of emblems fluttered in the wind and formed a new sea line antenna, anyone could feel the majesty contained in it. Smarty sucked in a cold breath. Is this the flag of Grey Castle? White murmured in disbelief. You mean, the King of Grey Castle is here? As the sedimentation bay could not accommodate so many large ships, most of the ships lowered their sails outside the harbor, while the 10 steam-powered ships sailed straight into the harbor. As soon as they reached the shore, a group of people in uniforms of the same color rushed out from the gangplank, quickly assembled into several rows on the trestles, and marched neatly into the harbor. These people were expressionless, but their eyes were chilling. They looked like seasoned warriors, but they did not have the arrogance that they showed on the outside. White swallowed his saliva. Although he had never seen such a team before, he felt a heartfelt fear in his heart. He knew that he was not the only one who felt this way. These outsiders quickly occupied every pier, but no one dared to raise any objections. White realized that this fleet was not here for business. The atmosphere on the harbor seemed to freeze. Chapter 1203. Damn the weather, Baron Jean Bates said in a low voice as he stood by the window and looked at the cloudy sky. It's going to rain again. The sedimentation bay, which was close to the sea, had no shortage of rainwater, especially in the summer and autumn. It was common for the sky to be blue one moment and stormy the next. Therefore, the city had prepared everything from flagstone roads to underground drainage facilities. Unlike Broken Tooth Castle or Greystone City, where a rainstorm could turn the lowlands into puddles, the place was muddy. 1 or 2 heavy rains would at most delay the unloading of merchant ships, but the impact on the city was almost negligible. It was more about his mood than the weather. Unfortunately, the dark clouds would dissipate after the heavy rain, but his mood would not. My lord, have you thought about what to say to them? Zom, the clerk, asked cautiously. Answer. Baron sneered. You have to choose between being hanged or burned to death. What will you say? Ah. The clerk was speechless. You don't have a choice. Keep delaying it. But. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he could not say anything. In fact, even if he did not say anything, Jean Bate knew that it would be difficult to delay the matter forever. Just like the clouds and rain in the sky, no matter how much the merchants did not want to see it, they would fall eventually. The reason for all this was the war with the church. After the destruction of the kingdom of Wolfheart, a large number of illegitimate children of the Wolf King emerged overnight. The lords formed factions and fought against each other, as if they were the rightful rulers. After a series of battles, 3 major forces gradually formed: the Token family in the northwest, the Redstone Gate family in the south, and the Tusk family in the east. The former did not cause any trouble to the sedimentation bay due to their distance, but the latter two were different. Both dukes wanted to draw the sedimentation bay to their side and further expand their power. In the early stage of the war, Baron insisted on maintaining a neutral position in the port and did not offend any party. This not only helped the city recover its prosperity quickly, but also brought him a lot of income. To ensure that the goods could be exchanged for food or the golden dragon in time, the two dukes did not force him too much. But after a new round of annexation and expansion, the Tusk and Red Stone Gate gradually stood out and became the strongest competitors for the new Alpha. Moreover, the Toxcan family suddenly closed the Cage Mountain, so the two families set their sights on the Sedimentation Bay again. Baron could guess what they were up to even if he used his knees. Taking over the Sedimentation Bay and stopping the enemy's trade would give them a great advantage in this competition. Thus, this time, not only did they send an emissary, but they also brought along a few dozen knight and hundreds of mercenaries. Their attitude was self-evident. The harbor only had a patrol team to maintain order, as well as a group of personal guards to protect the suzerain's safety. They could deal with the pirates who were not wearing any clothes, but against a fully armed knight, they had no ability to protect themselves. Jean Bate did not plan to resist. If the three great powers had already determined the winner and the Wolf King had been decided, he would pledge his loyalty without hesitation. As for whether the new Wolf King came from the old Wolf King's bloodline, he didn't care. However, Red Stone Gate and Fong were evenly matched. Defecting to either of them was a dead end. No matter which side he chose to side with, the other side would never sit back and watch as they lost the sea trade. That meant that they had to rely on their own production of food, ironware, and other resources, while the other side would have an endless supply of supplies. Therefore, if he defected to either side, he would definitely be attacked by the other side. The Sedimentation Bay did not have an indestructible city wall or a deep moat. To defend itself, he could only rely on the full support of the side that defected to him. But would the two families really support him? Baron dared not take the risk. If he were the Duke of Red Stone Gate or the Tusk Gate, he would naturally think of using the people of the Sedimentation Bay to weaken the attackers and then launching a pincer attack. This would effectively reduce the casualties of the elite knight. He could even let the enemies enter the city and block the way out, slowly exhausting them. After all, the other side wanted the Sedimentation Bay, not the people. In other words, the Sedimentation Bay would be better without Jean Bate. As mentioned before, it was a matter of choosing to be hanged or burned to death. By placing the two emissary groups in the same camp, he hoped to make use of their hostility to buy time. It would be even better if they started fighting. He even provided them with liquor and women several times and deliberately let them choose together. Unfortunately, they never drew their swords against each other even though they fought fiercely. Drip, drip, the rain finally fell, and the garden of the governor's mansion became hazy as if it was covered by a thin layer of gauze. Staring at the gently swaying petals in the rain, Baron remained silent. Waiting like this was not the solution, but he could not think of a way to remain neutral. His grandfather often said that the nobles often wavered between interests and power. As long as he made good use of this, he would be able to benefit from both sides. Perhaps he should calm down, give up those petty tricks, and think about how to get out of this predicament from a strategic perspective. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Sir, bad news. What are you panicking for? Let's talk this out. Jean Bate glared at the person who came. What's wrong? Did the knight finally start fighting? If that was the case, it would be good news. He stared at the guard's mouth, hoping to read the word camp or knights from the movement of his lips. The fleet of the King of Greycastle has occupied the harbor. However, the guard's words were completely beyond his imagination, and he could not react for a moment. Not only that, they also blocked the dock area and forbade anyone from approaching. What did you say? Greycastle? Baron repeated subconsciously. Do they want to buy or sell something? Wait, did you just say blocked? Yes. The guard said anxiously. They drove away the ships that were docked by the pier and only allowed their own ships to dock. They also said that this was a temporary requisition and that order would be restored soon. The patrol tried to stop them, but they were disarmed in the blink of an eye. According to the report, there are hundreds of Greycastle ships outside the harbor. Jean Bate could not believe it. Are you sure it's the fleet of the King of Greycastle? Not the family emblem of a certain lord? Yes, I saw it with the telescope. The guard nodded with difficulty. It's indeed the flag of the royal family of Greycastle with a tower and a spear. Dear God, is Greycastle planning to invade the kingdom of Wolfheart? Why would Wimbledon give up the rich neighboring country and make a detour to me? Even if the king of Greycastle wanted to expand his territory, he did not have to launch an attack from the sea, did he? Could the Duncan family really resist the Greycastle army that defeated the church? No, it did not make sense at all. For a moment, Baron's mind was in a mess, and he could not make sense of it at all. Until Zoom, the clerk, walked up to him and whispered something in his ear. Baron's eyes suddenly lit up. Yes, this might be the opportunity he had been waiting for. There was no doubt that Greycastle was powerful enough to break the stalemate between the two powers. Assuming that this fleet was really here to expand the territory of the King of Greycastle, no matter how strong they were, they would need the help of the local nobles when they first arrived in this strange land. With a little guidance, they might be able to drive the wolves to devour the tigers. Anyway, it did not matter who he was loyal to. If he expressed his loyalty to the King of Greycastle, he might be able to gain more power and become a guardian. Even if Wimbledon failed, he would not lose anything. At this moment, another guard ran in and said, "Your Excellency, the Greycastle fleet has sent a messenger. He said that he has come bearing the decree of His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. He hopes to discuss it with you." Chapter 1204. Anytime? The guard was stunned. What if it's now, of course? This was not a polite answer. According to the rules, he should let the other party rest for a day or two before holding a sumptuous banquet. If not, he should at least set a time, such as at night. After all, the other party represented the King of Greycastle, so it was reasonable for him to be serious. However, Baron did not want to wait any longer. If it were not for the fact that it was raining outside, he would have taken the initiative to go to the dock to have a look. Without a doubt, such a large fleet would definitely attract the attention of the envoys of Tusk and Redstone Gate. If they got in touch with the other party first, things would get complicated. By the way, Jean Bate hurriedly said to the guard, "Tell the people of Greycastle about the other two families. Tell them that I'm the only one who can make decisions in the sedimentation bay." "Yes, sir." After the guard left, Baron suddenly regretted his decision. Perhaps he should not have said any time. What if the other party followed the etiquette and came 1 or 2 days later? At the end of the day, it was all because of the trace of self-esteem at the bottom of his heart. He should have been more straightforward. The rain came at this time of all times. It was as if the rain was against him. Baron looked at the heavy rain outside the window and fell into a dilemma. However, the guard came back faster than he expected. It took him less than half an hour, and he brought him a piece of delightful news. "Sir, they're here." Jean Bate suddenly stood up from his seat. "Quick, bring them to my parlor." Very soon, Baron met the guests of Greycastle in the parlor of the governor's mansion. There were only 10 people in total. Half of them were probably guards, standing outside the door. The rest of them were dressed more formally. They were probably clerical assistants. The one sitting in the middle should be the representative of the King of Greycastle. He noticed that the coats they took off and hung on the wall seemed to be waterproof. Even though it was raining heavily outside, there were no traces of wetness on their bodies. Furthermore, the coat was bright in color. It was neither leather nor felt, so it was obviously a good item. It seemed that the rumor that Greycastle had produced many strange objects in recent years was true. However, when he looked carefully at the person in charge, he frowned inwardly. He was clearly a Maugin clan member. Such barbarians usually appeared in slave markets. How did they become the upper nobles of Greycastle? However, the Baron did not show his surprise on his face. He put on a warm smile and spread his arms. "I'm the Lord of the Sedimentation Bay, Baron Jean Bate. As you can see, this city is prosperous and beautiful, very suitable as a place to rest after a long voyage. May I know why all of you have come from afar?" Even if the other party was a duke, he should still be able to accept it with a smile. However, the Maugin remained expressionless. "I'm Iron Axe, the commander of His Majesty's First Army and the person in charge of this expedition. Let's skip the formalities and make a long story short. The Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart are likely to become bloody battlefields. I'm here on behalf of His Majesty Roland Wimbledon, the King of Greycastle, the chief of the Maugine clan and the ruler of the Fertile Plains. What's going on? For a moment, Jean Bate doubted his own ears. Great, Chief. What kind of title is that? Where is the Fertile Plains? Putting aside these details, does he mean that the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart will become a battlefield by force? Why did he say that at the beginning? Shouldn't he say that after I refuse? But he has not asked me whether I agree or not. The clerk continued, excuse me. Is the First Army the one that defeated the church? Yes, the Maugine nodded. Sir Iron Axe, of course we don't want the war to spread to this land, but it's not up to the Sedimentation Bay to decide. There will always be people who want more. If you can convince them, the Kingdom of Wolfheart won't become a battlefield. Good job. Baron thought. In this way, I can naturally drag the other two families into this mess. He pretended to be regretful and nodded. He looked at Iron Axe, but unexpectedly saw a trace of sarcasm on his face. It's not up to you whether it will become a battlefield or not. When the enemy comes, the entire human race will fight for it. In fact, the war has already begun, in a place you don't know, Iron Axe said calmly. I think you've more or less heard some rumors about the church, the divine will, and the invasion of foreign tribes. Jean Bate was stunned. As the lord of the harbor, he had indeed heard similar things. Sea merchants had been to many places, and there were bound to be some strange things. However, these were only topics of conversation at the dinner table. It was inappropriate to bring it up in a formal diplomatic occasion. However, Iron Axe's tone was not sarcastic at all. Could it be? Yes, it's all true, Iron Axe said word by word. Outside the window, there was a rumble of thunder. Wow, are these people made of iron? Smarty exclaimed as he leaned on the fence of the stable and looked in the direction of the dock. Even iron will rust. I don't think they're human at all. After wiping the rain off the horse's back, White finally had time to tidy up his wet clothes. No normal person would deliberately get wet in the rain. Only idiots and lunatics are exceptions. In just over half an hour, hundreds of people from the ship had quickly taken control of the entire port. The peddlers had all evacuated before the storm started, but they did the opposite. They set up tents one after another in the middle of the empty space. In the blink of an eye, the dark green tents covered more than half of the dock. In addition, the Greycastle people also piled up obstacles at the intersection and higher places. Some thick and solid metal pipes were set up. They did not look like weapons, otherwise they would not have been exposed to the rain. However, looking at the cold, black reflections, White always felt uneasy. There were people stationed in front of each of these checkpoints. Although they had put on rain cloaks that covered their whole bodies, it was impossible to keep the rain out in such weather. The sea breeze that swept past the port from time to time would blow the rain away, and it was easy for the rain to pour into the gaps of their collars and cuffs. White could already imagine how their clothes would look like when they were soaked. It must be a terrible feeling. The Sedimentation Bay was humid and rainy, and the local lord had set up many temporary shelters in the dock area. However, these people did not seem to care. They did not even look at them, let alone take shelter from the rain. With their pitch-black cloaks, they looked like towering stones in the rain. The people of Greycastle have gone crazy. White muttered in his heart. Hey, that's strange, Smarty suddenly said in a low voice. What's wrong? White asked impatiently. Look at the ship they're using to transport the goods, and then look at those outside the port, he pointed and said, they're all three-masted ships, but the draft is so different. Draft? What do you mean? Just take it as a standard for how much cargo they're carrying, Smarty said, waving his hand. Even though they've unloaded so much cargo, their draft is still much deeper than those outside. It's hard to understand, Why are the people of Grey Castle doing this? Are they just trying to create a scene? What the hell are you talking about? White said impatiently. What I'm trying to say is, those ships might be empty. Smarty said in a low voice. When Iron Axe stopped talking, Jean Bate finally recovered from his disbelief. He had heard about the long history of the war between humans and demons. Every 400 years, they would come back, and this time, the demons might launch an attack from the border of the impassable mountain range. Are you sure? If he remembered correctly, to the north of the kingdom of Everwinter was a towering mountain range, like a precipice rising from the ground. Attacking from there? Are you kidding me? I'm not sure, so we sent out a scouting team to make sure nothing goes wrong. Iron Axe shrugged. But no matter which direction the demons invade from, it won't make any difference. If we don't gather all our forces, the border of this narrow continent will be engulfed in a sea of fire. Humans will cease to exist. Baron had a strange feeling of floating, as if he were in a dream even though he was sitting in the parlor. Not only him, but the clerk and the guards also seemed to feel the same way. Ahem, okay, I'll take what you said as the truth. After a while, Jean Bate cleared his throat and said, then why did the king of Grey Castle send you to the kingdom of Wolfheart? If he wants to fight the demons, shouldn't he go to the kingdom of Everwinter? Of course, the kingdom of Everwinter is also in the plan. You don't have to worry about it. Our purpose here is very simple. We want to take away as many people as possible who might be affected by the war. Freedmen, slaves, refugees, and vagabonds are all on the list. Iron Axe paused. The only exception is the nobles. It's up to you whether you want to leave or not. If you fully cooperate with the First Army, when we leave, everything here, including your property, your territory, your title, will belong to you. If you stop us. Baron swallowed hard. Chapter 1205. Jean Bate did not want to become the enemy of the King of Grey Castle. Although he had never really interacted with the people of Grey Castle, he had heard many rumors about them. The God's Punishment Army, which had swept through the kingdom of Wolfheart and the kingdom of Everwinter, had been defeated by Grey Castle. The allied forces formed by the nobles of the Kingdom of Dawn had been routed within a day. Roland Wimbledon had been invincible in the kingdom and had unified the entire kingdom within half a year. It was even rumored that Grey Castle had played a role in the recent incident on the Archduke Island. He had thought that these rumors were shocking enough, but he did not expect that the First Army had been fighting with demons of foreign races for the past year. If it had been another lord who claimed this, he would have scoffed at it. However, when it came from the commander-in-chief of the First Army, Baron found that he did not dare to express his doubts. Of course, no one from the Sedimentation Bay was qualified to test it out. The problem was that the plan of the King of Grey Castle was too grand, or rather, too whimsical. If the king only wanted the throne of the kingdom of Wolfheart, Jean Bate would not hesitate to submit to him. But the truth was that the other party wanted to empty the population of the two kingdoms. Just listen to what this commander-in-chief said. Advancing from multiple routes, with both land and sea transportation going at the same time. First the villages, then the towns. It really seemed like they wouldn't stop until they had moved everything. Most nobles did not care too much about the lives of their subjects, as long as their deaths were worthwhile or could be exchanged for sufficient benefits. But moving all of them away was a different matter. That meant that the territory would be empty, the food would not be harvested, the taxes would fall to the bottom, and no one would take care of the industry. Unless everything was irreversible, they would not easily agree to it. No matter how powerful the First Army was, it would be difficult for them to fight against all the nobles at the same time, right? After all, this wasn't Grey Castle. Without the support of the locals, the burden of marching and logistics would be greatly increased. Yet, they still wanted to split up their forces. It was as if they were treating the nobles of the two countries as heir. After a long silence, Jean Bate said in a low voice, I don't quite understand why the King of Grey Castle must do this. In case the demons do not intend to cross the impassable mountain range to attack, we can support them here. But once the people are gone, the cities, farmlands, and mines will all become barren. Such a loss is truly incalculable. I can't answer your question. As the Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, my only task is to complete the task assigned by His Majesty. But... Iron Axe paused for a moment. As long as you go to Neverwinter in person, you should be able to get the answer. Well, then I only have one last question. Baron licked his dry lips. You said before that the nobles are all voluntary. What if I decide to go with you? Iron Axe nodded and pointed to the civil servant beside him. This is Remy, the Migration Personnel Officer of the Administrative Office of Neverwinter. He'll tell you what His Majesty wants. Greetings, Mr. Baron. You are now a member of the Grey Castle Kingdom. The personnel officer quickly flipped through the documents in his hands. First of all, we can be sure that His Majesty Roland Wimbledon is a kind and generous king. He will not mistreat anyone who has contributed to Grey Castle. Since Grey Castle has abolished the system of feudal nobles and unified the laws throughout the kingdom, you will lose the right to inherit and enfeoffment your land. But as an experienced administrator, you can join the administrative office and become the governor of a region. Or you can help His Majesty develop a new territory, such as the Fertile Plains. Of course, if the demons don't invade the Four Kingdoms, you can continue to manage the Sedimentation Bay. If you're lucky, the area you're in charge of may be many times larger than it is now. After all, not every noble would make such a choice. The document was very long, and it took almost a quarter of an hour for the clerk to stop. He had considered all aspects of the situation, so it was obviously not made up in a short time. Jean Bate realized that the person who had written this document must be an extremely capable minister. He could never write such a comprehensive document. In short, the content of the document was to exchange short-term benefits for long-term benefits. As long as he performed well, he could get far more than a harbor lord. As for whether the two were worth it, it was a question that varied from person to person. In the face of an unknown future, it was unwise to make a hasty decision. However, when the situation was bad enough, the choice was not so important. Compared to being hanged or burned to death, at least there was a way to survive in the future. Moreover, a large-scale population transfer was not something that could be completed in a year or two. During this period, he could still stay as the Lord of the Sedimentation Bay without worrying about the other two families. Jean Bate took a deep breath and said, "I'm willing to join the King of Grey Castle and serve his kingdom." Wise choice. Iron Axe's expression did not change, as if he had already expected this result. Then from now on, you can mobilize the people in the surrounding area to move. We have a special team in charge of this, and they'll give you the most suitable advice. So soon? Baron was surprised. Yes, I won't stay here for too long. The First Army will continue to march into the interior of the Kingdom of Wolfheart in 3 days at most. But, Jean Bate hesitated and finally said through gritted teeth, the Tusk and Redstone Gate Knight may not allow me to do this. They may not dare to openly oppose Grey Castle, but there are only a few patrols in the Sedimentation Bay. They can easily interfere with my orders. This was a little embarrassing. After all, an hour ago, he had said that he was the only one who could make decisions in the Sedimentation Bay. However, Baron knew that he had to bring this up now. Otherwise, if the other two families knew that he had pledged allegiance to Grey Castle and that the Sedimentation Bay was open to them, they might secretly cause trouble. At the same time, this was also a test. If the other two families did not seem to care, then his previous promise would be greatly disregarded. However, Iron Axe's answer was beyond his expectations. The Sedimentation Bay is one of the key hubs of the migration plan. There can't be any accidents. Even if the First Army leaves, I'll leave 100 soldiers here. The Majins nodded to one of their attendants, who quickly left the parlor. Also, before I arrived here, I had a certain understanding of the situation in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. As I said before, you can't obstruct us by openly opposing us. You can also obstruct us by secretly plotting against us. In order to prevent the latter from affecting the efficiency of the migration plan, we often take some proactive measures to dispel their hopes. You mean? It's better to see it with my own eyes than to talk about it, Iron Axe said as he stood up. Don't worry. The threat you're worried about will soon be gone. The rain doesn't show any signs of letting up, Smarty said as he stretched his hand out of the straw shed of the stable and felt the rain falling from the edge of the shed. So, White said as he hammered his sore leg, why are you still here? I don't want to get soaked. Besides, the Lord built this shed for everyone. I can stay here as long as I want. He turned around and made a face. You. The old coachman was speechless. This damn brat. If I don't teach him a lesson, he won't know how to respect his elders. When White got up and was about to slap him, he suddenly noticed a group of people from Grey Castle leaving their station. Even in the heavy rain, these hundreds of people lined up neatly in 2 columns. Their hurried footsteps created a series of splashes on the stone pavement. The most eye-catching thing was the things they carried on their backs. They were all metal pipes of different lengths and thicknesses, glowing with a cold light. Just like the black tools set up in the sentry post, they gave off an ominous feeling. Looking at the backs of these people gradually disappearing in the rain, White suddenly realized where this ominous feeling came from. Regardless of the length or thickness, those metal pipes did not look like something a blacksmith could make. A creation that was beyond the power of man itself meant that it was extraordinary. The other people who took shelter from the rain also noticed this scene, and there was a burst of whispers in the straw shed. Unexpectedly, White did not hear Smarty's muttering.